In the middle of the bustling city stood the most prestigious university, a gathering place for elites where even money couldn't buy a spot. Right at the gates of Nexus Tech, the main character proudly shared that she was an international business major, one of the departments with insanely high admission scores. However, the academic pressure was extremely heavy as the professors graded incredibly strictly, causing the highest score in the recent exam to merely hit a 7. The crowd of students walked and chatted animatedly, some breathing a sigh of relief for barely passing, while others trembled in fear of the grueling final exams approaching. Suddenly, the whole group froze upon sensing a cold and gloomy aura engulfing a corner of the classroom. All eyes turned to the back of the class, where the darkness radiated so thickly that anyone passing by would shudder in terror. Emerging from that grayish haze was Vivi, a sophomore majoring in international business, slouched over her desk with a dazed and lifeless expression. She constantly tore at her hair, lamenting that her grades were too low, while dreading that her mother would fly into a rage over this disastrous result. In stark contrast to that panic, a delicate pair of hands nonchalantly touched up makeup with incredibly calm and professional gestures. The owner of that composure was Ain Pham, an acting major, who advised her friend to calm down since there were still the final exams ahead to make up for it. Ain nonchalantly calculated that scoring an 8 on the finals would be fine, but Vivi immediately brushed it off and screamed that it was impossible when even the best student in the class only got a 7. She tilted her head back in sheer helplessness, silently cursing her fate that a straight-A student of 12 years like herself was now so miserable, and regretted not choosing the arts path from the very beginning. Ain's gaze suddenly turned sharp as she brought up how Vivi was supposed to pursue painting, but only because of her ex-boyfriend did the poor girl decide to change her major at the last minute. Instantly, Vivi sprang up like a coil with a panicked look, hastily denying that harsh truth despite her completely disheveled appearance. Unrelenting, Ain rested her chin on her hand and continued to dig up memories of the guy who had promised to study art together but abandoned Vivi to study abroad, driving her to choose this total opposite major out of pure resentment. Vivi turned her back with trembling shoulders and beads of nervous sweat, begging her friend to stop because it had been over a year and she didn't want to mention that jerk's name anymore. In her hilariously petite frame, Ain poured more cold water by revealing that the guy was happy with his new lover in France, while Vivi was still all alone as Christmas fast approached. After teasing to her heart's content, Ain's slender hand gently lifted from the desk, and she casually announced that it was time for her to head back to class. Watching her friend's retreating figure, Vivi angrily asked if poking at other people's pain every morning was fun, making Ain simply burst out laughing and reply that it was how she recharged her energy. Before disappearing from sight, the actress didn't forget to leave an invitation for boba tea after class to make up for it, which somewhat soothed Vivi's gloomy mood. Vivi buried her face in the desk, telling herself that getting bad grades was tragic enough, and now she also had to face the sorrow of being alone right before the upcoming Christmas. She gazed out the hazy window and silently wondered what kind of life that awful ex-boyfriend was living now in a faraway land. In Vivi's mind appeared the image of him happily admiring the Eiffel Tower with his new girl, making a flash of extreme melancholy and depression cross her face. Suddenly, a voice called out, cutting through her wandering thoughts and snapping her awake from the sad memories closing in on her. Vivi turned around in confusion with a questioning look, her hand lightly covering her mouth in a natural reflex upon hearing someone call her name. In another corner, a group of students was whispering and gossiping about Ain, mocking how she always wore designer clothes to school just to land a rich husband. Unable to sit still, Vivi coldly revealed that Ain's family owned the prestigious NKIM conglomerate, and her friend could easily support 10 husbands if she wanted to. The firm assertion made the surrounding crowd awkwardly stiffen, and they hastily made excuses that they were only joking and had no intention of insulting the actress. However, their jealousy remained obvious as they sneered that Vivi was just riding her rich friend's coattails, then immediately shifted their attack to a figure who had just entered the room. The whole group laughed and ridiculed the poor nerdy guy for arriving late. They constantly mocked his overly intellectual appearance and joked that he would soon burst into tears from being teased. Vivi narrowed her eyes at the group with disgust, quietly telling herself that these people always used mocking others as a joke. She felt a fleeting sense of pity for the nerdy guy, but quickly brushed it aside to worry about her own abysmal grades. Amidst the crowd of students busy with their laptops, Vivi sat all alone in a corner and let despair completely engulf her mind. The class started when the professor walked in and asked about the presentation groups, prompting the male lead to quietly prepare for the important task ahead. The scene suddenly shifted to the vast sky, where streaks of white clouds drifted idly by as if signaling a change in location. May House appeared in all its poetic beauty, a cafe combined with a handmade pottery workshop nestled beneath the cool green canopy. Back in the classroom, the nerdy guy adjusted his glasses with a determined gaze when the professor ordered the presentations to begin. At the pottery workshop, the young female employee was busy by the porcelain display shelf when she received an offer to take some time off because she looked too exhausted. Faced with the manager's genuine concern, the girl could only manage a forced smile, even though her face clearly showed a pale and lifeless look. In reality, she looked incredibly pathetic at this moment, no different from a soul whose energy had been completely drained and was about to vanish into thin air. The female manager brewed coffee, while chuckling at Vivi's gloomy mood during every exam season, advising her to take time off work to focus on her studies. Vivi, with a pitifully trembling body, hastily protested out of fear that the workshop would be short-staffed, but the manager smiled and said she would hire a new employee. The girl burst into loud sobs thinking she was getting fired, forcing the manager to quickly explain that this was just extra help and no one was being laid off. On the wooden table appeared a specialized pottery toolkit with all kinds of paintbrushes, sponges, and paint palettes waiting for skilled hands to touch them. Vivi let out a really long sigh, telling herself she had to push all her sadness aside to get to work. She decided to slap her cheeks hard to pull herself together, then flashed a radiant smile and resolved to give it her all for a highly productive workday. High above, the clear blue sky was dotted with fluffy white drifting clouds, bringing a fresh atmosphere that ignited vitality for the entire pottery workshop. The garden scene at May House became more bustling than ever as guests started gathering under the shade of the trees to experience the handicraft class. Vivi attentively leaned in to instruct a student on how to pull the clay upwards and reminded them to keep their hands perfectly steady so the vase would stay balanced. Seeing the student overjoyed at finishing their first piece, she smiled and affirmed that this was her job and she was always willing to help whenever a guest needed it. Vivi glanced over at the adjacent corner with a thoroughly exhausted expression, silently wondering why that woman had trekked all the way here just to make pottery. Right before her eyes was a clingy couple. The guy sweetly asked for his girlfriend's opinion on the bowl's shape and promised to fulfill his lover's every wish. The space was filled with cheesiness as the guy flatteringly claimed he wanted to mold the piece after her beauty because he considered it the cutest thing in the world. The girl coyly gave him a light smack on the shoulder, scolding him for being a smooth talker and demanding her lover stop the flattery that was making her blush. The two hugged each other tightly amidst floating pink hearts, with the girl generously declaring she'd buy her boyfriend an expensive phone right after they left. Vivi stood dead in her tracks before this passionate display of romance, inwardly horrified by the extreme love-struck nature of the female guest in front of her. Just then, a co-worker ran over in a panic pleading for help, her hand lightly resting on Vivi's shoulder as if seeking a savior for her troubles. Her friend sighed and pointed at the familiar guest sitting all alone in the corner of the yard, someone who had tried his absolute best but kept continuously ruining the clay. With a face full of helplessness, the coworker questioned what this guy's motive was, coming to make pottery all by himself for 4 consecutive times. Vivi smiled and teased her friend, bringing up the fact that she was the one who had fought for the right to instruct him with extreme excitement on the very first day he walked in. Images of the past flashed back to when the coworker was daydreaming about meeting a single guy with a highly artistic vibe. Yet right now she was hugging Vivi's leg, begging her friend to take over the customer because she had completely given up. In the distance, the strange guest's clumsy hands were still wrestling with a misshapen lump of clay on the violently shaking potter's wheel. The guy, with his hat pulled down low covering his face, let out a soft, helpless sigh upon seeing his creation still failing to take shape. Approaching his side, Vivi gently observed the disastrous mess and then spoke up to ask about the troubles he was having. She placed a hand on his shoulder to reassure him, while instructing the guest to scoot closer to the wheel and relax his stiff shoulders. The guest tilted his head slightly to listen, his face clearly showing concentration but still unable to hide the tension behind his glasses. Noticing he was using far too much force, Vivi asked him to pause, so they could both start over from the very first steps. She advised him to maintain a calm state of mind because the lifeless clay would sense the impatience coming from the potter's hands. Vivi meticulously instructed him on how to wet his hands and the clay to get just enough smoothness without turning everything into a muddy swamp. Vivi guided the guest to place both hands on the lump of clay, emphasizing the use of force to press firmly inward and downward to anchor its position. But his hands still proved to be extremely clumsy, causing the clay to deform and start shaking nonstop on the potter's wheel. Vivi explained that the pushing force from the clay was trying to throw the potter's hands off and asserted that balance was the only key to mastering it. She leaned in close to pass on the technique of drawing power from the arms instead of the wrists, then encouraged him to gently push inward. At a very close distance, she told him to use his thumbs to press into the exact center of the clay slowly and to absolutely not touch the bottom of the wheel. Vivi's face grew serious as she taught the technique of pulling the pottery walls by placing 2 fingers to form a pincer on both the inside and outside. The guest's eyes behind his prescription glasses flickered slightly. It seemed he was holding his breath to focus intensely on this highly challenging next step. Seeing the clay start to rise as intended, she spoke up to praise his outstanding progress and urged him to maintain that excellent stability. The nerdy guy stayed silent, but his tightly pressed lips showed a massive amount of determination hidden behind his scholarly appearance. With a resolute gaze focused straight ahead, he quietly executed each final movement to complete his masterpiece. Right in the middle of working at the pottery workshop, Vivi was startled to hear her coworker calling out, urging her to hurry over and help a special guest. Approaching the nerdy guy who was sitting with his back turned, she received a desperate plea to rescue an oddly shaped creation that was slowly deforming. Her coworker couldn't help but mock this insanely difficult idea of sculpting a human face, even comparing the lump of clay to an ugly species of fish. Unconsciously, Vivi froze and closely observed every feature on the strange guest's face, her mind constantly wondering why he looked so incredibly familiar. However, reality suddenly snapped back to the prestigious university, where even the brilliant morning sunlight couldn't dispel the stressful academic atmosphere. During class, her close friends excitedly suggested heading over tomorrow to the pottery workshop, where Vivi worked part-time to handcraft Christmas gifts for their loved ones. With a soft smile, Vivi let them know she had just requested time off to focus completely on finals, but was still more than willing to recommend them, so her friends could get a discount. Ignoring her friends' regrets about wanting her specifically to instruct them, Vivi firmly stated she would only return after exams and promised to text her coworker to help them out. Vivi let out a soft sigh full of regret, thinking to herself that if her friend group had come one day earlier, it would have been perfect, and her mind began drifting back to the events of yesterday. She recalled the exquisitely decorated daisy mug, a testament showing the unbelievable leaps of progress thanks to that nerdy guy's sheer perseverance. The sketched image of the guy who always wore a hat hiding his face along with a pair of thick glasses gradually materialized in her mind's eye. Right at this moment, by the classroom window, the back of a male student engrossed in his work completely caught Vivi's attention. She suddenly froze in astonishment upon discovering the unbelievable match between this person and the customer at the pottery shop yesterday. She narrowed her eyes and stared in deep suspicion, trying to piece together the tiniest details to verify the other person's identity. Suddenly, the professor ordered the whole class to split into groups of 4 to discuss a plan for introducing perfume into the Shanghai market. Seeing that her old friend group was already full, Vivi quietly turned and walked away, deciding she would look for a new team on her own. She scanned the classroom with a flustered look, secretly wondering to herself if there were any open spots left for her. Vivi's gaze stopped at the front row, where the nerdy guy was still sitting all alone amidst the rushing crowd. Observing his diligent writing posture, she told herself she should approach and suggest teaming up together to work on the assignment. Right at this moment, by the classroom window, the back of a male student engrossed in his work completely caught Vivi's attention. Vivi tiptoed closer behind the nerdy male student who was highly focused on his laptop. She offered a very awkward greeting along with a question of whether he had found a discussion group for himself yet. Flashing the most radiant smile she possibly could, she straightforwardly expressed her desire to form a team with him for the assignment. The guy looked up to reveal a strikingly handsome and masculine face, and Vivi softly called out Han Lu's name with the admiration reserved for the valedictorian. Faced with the enthusiastic invitation, Han Lu just stayed silent for a moment before dropping an extremely harsh rejection. That decisive reaction left Vivi so stunned she practically turned to stone, her face completely distorted in sheer shock. The guy nonchalantly went back to his work, leaving her standing all by herself in the middle of the classroom filled with overflowing disappointment. Swallowing her pride, she silently turned her back to find another group, which made Han suddenly panic and hastily try to hold her back. He reached out to grab her fading silhouette and frantically explained that his true intentions weren't bad at all. With an incredibly awkward expression, he confirmed that he didn't have a group either and hoped she wouldn't misunderstand his clumsy words from earlier. Vivi frowned in doubt about Han Lu's communication skills, but still took a risk, begging him to let her join his group. Han panicked and demanded a convincing reason, forcing Vivi to swear that she was incredibly hardworking and would shoulder all responsibilities. The girl crossed her arms in deep, calculating thought, finally satisfied with a highly profitable exchange plan for both sides. With a radiant rosy flush, Vivi happily clapped her hands and resolved to find 2 more members to fill out the team. Immediately, she approached a female student who was focused on taking notes and received a very quick nod of agreement to join. Just as she was about to invite the next person, Vivi suddenly froze when she bumped into Kane Duong, the male student who had just returned to school with a murderous aura. Whispers began echoing across the classroom about a past incident that made his former group members burst into tears out of sheer terror. Vivi's face turned ashen as she heard rumors that Kane's family belonged to the notorious mafia and had participated in bloody purges. Without hesitation, the girl instantly forced a smile and tried to flee, explaining that she was just joking and had no intention of inviting him. Suddenly, an authoritative shout to stop rang out from behind, leaving Vivi stunned, her entire body trembling violently amidst the gloomy atmosphere. Kane Duong growled, asking if Vivi had just invited him to join the group, making the girl tremble to the point of tears. His eyes were sharp, cold, and dark as if wanting to devour her, enveloping them in a suffocating atmosphere. Yet, the school boss suddenly underwent a bizarrely radiant transformation, eagerly accepting the invitation and expressing a fierce desire to join. Witnessing this lightning-fast attitude change, Aine froze, unable to believe her own eyes. Too shocked by the unexpected turn of events, Vivi's mind went completely blank, and she collapsed onto the floor in a dead faint. The brilliant sunlight pierced through the classroom window blinds, signaling the start of an intensely stressful group work session. The bizarre lineup consisting of the nerdy valedictorian, the school boss, and 2 female students officially began their discussion. The female member proposed a strategy of using celebrities and live streaming sales along with a buy one get one free promotion. Vivi immediately objected out of concern that the luxury brand's value would be cheapened. She wanted to focus on emphasizing the rare, natural origins of the ingredients. However, Han Lu quickly dismantled that argument with practical knowledge, forcing Vivi to silently admit her shortcomings. Han Lu slightly adjusted his glasses, nonchalantly stating that everyone's ideas were not quite on the right track yet. He bluntly criticized the other female member for turning a luxury brand into a heap of cheap flea market goods. Turning to Vivi, he coldly compared her idea to bringing dry firewood into the forest to sell to the wealthy. The nerdy guy intertwined his fingers, explaining that the upper class buys perfume primarily to assert their social status. While Western brands sell historical glamour, Han asserted that the team had to find something their competitors lacked, which was the Zen philosophy, turning the product into a soul-healing therapy deeply imbued with Asian culture. Vivi was stunned in admiration by Han's sharp vision, secretly acknowledging that his argument was incredibly convincing. She timidly turned to ask for Kane's opinion, hoping this hulking friend would also have something to contribute. Faced with his terrifying silence and overwhelming aura, Vivi hastily forced a laugh and asked him to just keep thinking. No one expected that behind that rugged exterior, the boss would quietly shed a sparkling tear of deep emotion. The 3 faces in the group simultaneously showed clear astonishment, amazed by the unbelievable turn of events right before their eyes. Amidst a radiant halo, the boss Kane Duong clasped his hands over his chest, sniffling in emotion upon absorbing such profound knowledge for the first time in his life. He fanatically gripped Han Lu's hands in gratitude, making Vivi, who sat nearby, sweat bullets and secretly scoff at this overly dramatic action. After that emotional outburst, Han awkwardly pulled his hands back and asked the whole group to quickly focus on discussing the rest of the project. Vivi reached out and tapped lightly on the table, curiously asking Han to clarify more about his highly creative market approach. The nerdy guy's eyes behind his glasses turned sharp as he analyzed the pressure in Shanghai and positioned the product as a meditation ritual. Listening to the explanation, Vivi suddenly felt a flutter in her heart from the deep, captivating voice of the friend who is usually extremely silent. Han asserted that the agarwood scent would offer an escape from the urban pace of life, with a price tag proportional to the belief in its soul-healing power. The girl suddenly snapped out of it, bringing her hand to her chin and blaming herself for being too slow to properly appreciate the valedictorian's genius capabilities earlier. Vivi stealthily turned to peek at Han Lu with an affectionately admiring gaze, making the guy startle slightly upon sensing the attention from her. Vivi secretly gazed at Han Lu with a flushed face full of admiration, causing the other party to slightly startle. The guy scratched his head in confusion, while Vivi resolved to beg this savior for help to secure her final exam grades. The girl stepped forward and pleaded for Han to spare some precious time to help her review all the material. Faced with the unexpected request, Han blushed awkwardly, wondering what was so special about him that she chose him as her tutor. Vivi excitedly listed a series of his merits, from his genius intellect to his deeply captivating, warm voice. Amidst the atmosphere that suddenly turned awkward, the girl realized she had just slipped up and praised him way too much. She hurriedly forced a laugh and waved her hands, correcting that her original intention was merely to praise his amazing composure. Han bashfully covered his mouth with his hand, stopping her from saying anything more because he felt incredibly embarrassed. Not giving up, Vivi officially proposed a private tutoring session and promised to pay a well-deserved tutoring fee. Han Lu looked straight into her eyes with scrutiny, along with a question to confirm her certainty about this bold decision. Han nodded in agreement to help Vivi study, but refused to accept the payment, making her joyfully thank him profusely, even though she remained determined to pay him fairly. Taking this opportunity, Vivi asked for the valedictorian's social media account for convenient communication instead of messages that easily got lost on the learning app. Han Lu looked briefly bewildered by the unexpected request, while the girl kept a bright smile waiting for his response. Seeing the guy fiddling with his phone for far too long, she curiously asked if he was busy creating a brand new account right at this moment. Vivi's face distorted in sheer shock upon discovering that her guess was absolutely correct. She couldn't believe he actually did that just to connect with her. Han held his blank phone screen forward and confirmed that he wanted to start using social media from now on so she wouldn't have to worry. Vivi waved goodbye, not forgetting to remind Han to check his personal schedule and notify her of his free time as soon as possible. As time passed, the tranquil night sky appeared with sparkling stars hiding behind the drifting fluffy clouds. Under the sallow streetlights, a spacious house emerged in the gloomy night, where the light from the window showed the owner was not yet sound asleep. Inside the study room, a wall completely covered in certificates and academic awards stood as eloquent proof of his relentless efforts over the years. Glittering trophies and commemorative medals lined the shelves, proving the valedictorian's remarkable track record of academic achievements. Vivi breathed a sigh of relief as she jotted it down in her personal schedule, telling herself that the overlap in their timetables was incredibly lucky. In her comfortable pajamas, the girl delightedly listed the rare pockets of free time Han had shared so they could study together. Suddenly, Vivi paused in confusion, wondering why an outstanding student like him had such an unbelievably large amount of free time. After some calculation, she decided to lock in study sessions for 3 days a week and set aside the evenings to rest to avoid burning out. With her slender hand holding her phone, she prepared to draft a text sending the detailed plan to her new study partner. Looking at the screen, Vivi's eyes suddenly widened in surprise, her face clearly showing excitement over the interesting things she had just discovered. On the social media interface, Han Lu's account appeared completely blank, and the strange thing was that he only followed her. Vivi threw her head back and laughed gleefully, secretly joking about how people would misunderstand, but was then interrupted by her younger sister calling her for dinner. Her sister's sudden appearance startled Vivi and made her lose her balance, causing her whole body to tumble backward, creating an incredibly hilarious yet pathetic situation. Vivi's younger sister ran off in a hurry to tattle to their mom that her older sister had a boyfriend, leaving the girl helplessly trembling as she called out after her to deny it. A heated argument broke out that night when the cheeky sibling asserted that smiling at a phone only happens to people in love, causing an angry Vivi to scold her as a little brat. At the high-end Lumina Residences apartment complex, night fell, covering up the secrets hidden behind the brightly lit windows. On the phone screen, Vivi took the initiative to set up a meeting at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning at the coffee shop across from the school gates to start their first study session. A sturdy hand lightly ruffled a masculine short haircut. It seemed its owner was lost in his own private calculations. The shirtless man, revealing his broad, muscular shoulders, grabbed his phone, the blue light from the screen illuminating the resolute angles of his body. His finger softly tapped on Vivi's profile, curiously exploring her brightly colored world through the girl's everyday photos. He slowly swiped past a picture of Vivi in a blue sweater affectionately petting a small cat with an incredibly gentle gaze. Continuing to scroll down, the image of an energetic young girl in denim overalls smiling brightly while holding 2 cups of water appeared so full of life that he couldn't take his eyes off her. Admiring Vivi's smile, the man with the sunflower tattoo on his shoulder chuckled in delight, an indescribable emotion creeping into his heart. Han sat quietly in the dark, his eyes glued to his phone as he explored Vivi's private world. His finger gently tapped on a photo of her looking radiant in her graduation gown, holding a bouquet of deep blue hydrangeas. His usual nerdy appearance had completely vanished, exposing bulging muscles and deeply mysterious tattoos across his body. He curled his lip into a cryptic smile, seemingly finding a special kind of amusement in that girl's moments. Suddenly, his finger paused at a class group photo, where the morning light clearly illuminated every joyous face. Han's eyes abruptly turned razor-sharp upon seeing Vivi affectionately holding hands tightly with a light-haired guy. The tightly intertwined hands in that old photo felt like a confirmation of a deep relationship, causing his mind to waver. He put the phone down, then quietly stood up and directed his gaze toward the brightly lit but utterly lonely city. The ferocious python tattoo on his broad back seemed to faintly appear in the dark, masking calculations that could not yet be named. High above, gray clouds began rolling in, signaling a massively strong cold front about to sweep in and blanket the entire area. The weather forecast warned of the coldest winter in the past decade, with biting cold about to sweep in and blanket the city. Amidst that atmosphere, the May House Cafe and Pottery Workshop still appeared poetically beneath the cool green trees. Han Lu, wearing a thick, heavy coat, entered the shop to ask about the status of his hand-sculpted cup and whether it had finished the firing process. The female employee busy organizing the pottery shelf glanced up, intending to ask for the customer's name to easily check the order. But then she suddenly froze in astonishment upon realizing the person standing before her was the familiar customer from all this time. Han stood motionless with his face hidden behind a high collar, only revealing his deep, mysterious eyes behind a pair of prescription glasses. He was briefly surprised that she still remembered his name so well, even though she asserted his frequent appearances were the reason for it. A sense of disappointment crept into Han's heart as he wondered why a stranger could remember his name so easily, while that person had completely forgotten it. He stood there quietly with his hands shoved deep into his pockets, scanning the room as if searching for a familiar silhouette. Out in the garden, other students were still engrossed at their potter's wheels, completely unaware of the young man's heavy heart. Han cast his eyes around the pottery workshop's garden, silently asking himself where Vivi's silhouette was right now. The female employee brought out the ceramic cup and asked him to wait a moment so she could wrap it carefully. Looking at the daisy on the side of the cup, Han unexpectedly asked about the whereabouts of the girl who worked with her, startling the person opposite him. Receiving the news that Vivi was on leave until after Christmas, Han's eyes suddenly dropped, clearly showing his disappointment. The girl further explained that because it was too cold, the shop was empty of customers and currently she was the only one managing the place. Their hands lightly brushed as the item was handed over. Han gave a brief word of thanks and prepared to leave. The conversation seemed to have ended until the guy grabbed the gift bag and was about to turn his back to walk away. Suddenly, the female employee reached out and grabbed Han tightly, loudly demanding that he stay a little longer. The nerdy guy slightly turned his head with eyes full of suspicion, wondering what trick this woman was trying to pull. Han coldly yanked the bag back and decisively walked away, leaving the girl stammering and asking what the hell he was doing. Han Lu narrowed his eyes and asked if the girl was harassing him in the middle of this freezing cold weather. The female employee awkwardly apologized and justified her previous grabbing action, saying she just didn't want him to leave immediately. She gathered all her courage to ask for the mysterious guest's Instagram account to find a way to keep in touch later on. In response to that enthusiasm was an indifferent turn of his head and an assertion that he didn't use social media at all. She continued to relentlessly pursue him for his phone number, harboring a tiny hope for a new chance to get close. Han nonchalantly declared he didn't have a phone, then decisively stepped out of the shop, leaving her in sheer astonishment. Gazing after his stone-cold back, the girl burst into loud sobs, secretly resenting the nerdy guy for being way too cold-hearted. In the distance, the prestigious university appeared towering in the center of the city, beneath the clear blue sky. The atmosphere at May House today seemed a bit different as a crowd of students was gathering and chatting animatedly. The cause lay in the phone displaying a post about Vivi causing a massive scene on the theater stage, with a huge amount of engagement. Aang nonchalantly scrolled through her phone, teasingly dropping the comment that Vivi was now even more famous than her and should consider switching to the comedy department. Vivi slumped her head on the table in a pathetic state, constantly groaning and demanding her friend to stop rubbing salt in her wounds right this instant. Around them, the crowd of students kept whispering and gossiping about the uproar at the theater arts department, making Vivi cry endless tears over her ruined reputation. Despite her friend's melancholy look, Aang rested her chin on her hand and smugly asked about her own acting skills, confident she had more than enough ability to fool Vivi. The girl smirked and commented that those two acted way too realistically, while Vivi looked like a true female villain. Faced with that indifferent attitude, Aang demanded a sincere compliment, even though she knew full well Vivi was inherently an extreme coward. But deep down in her heart, Aang secretly acknowledged that Vivi always found the courage to protect others whenever a situation turned terrible. Memories rushed back to the image of the petite schoolgirl with a trembling voice, yet her eyes shining with strong determination to shield her friend. Aang's gaze suddenly became razor-sharp. She narrowed her eyes with deep suspicion and spoke up to question why Vivi had hidden such an important secret. Upon hearing her friend ask about dating the nerdy guy, Vivi immediately spat out the entire mouthful of coffee she had just taken because she was so shocked. Vivi frantically covered her mouth, fiercely denying that she was in a romantic relationship with anyone. Aang immediately brought out the evidence, which was a candid photo of Vivi sitting closely next to a guy in the library. The mischievous girl accused Vivi of heartlessly chasing her away just to secretly have a private date with that guy. Vivi sweated bullets, hurriedly explaining that the other party was merely a smart classmate tutoring her to help her escape the tragedy of failing the course. Faced with her friend's skepticism, the nerdy girl guaranteed that only a pure friendship existed between them, and the sole goal was studying. Aang clicked her tongue and stated that due to the misunderstanding, she had just rejected a request for contact info from another male student. The photo of Enzo Din with his hot six-pack physique appeared on the phone, leaving Vivi unable to help but be stunned by his appearance. Aang recounted how the underclassman had been earnestly begging her since yesterday and considered the idea of helping this lovesick fool. The actress advised her friend to try getting to know someone new to quickly forget the awful ex-boyfriend from the past. Vivi forced a smile and waved her hand, affirming that all the old things were a distant past and she no longer cared about that guy. Vivi sat in silence amidst the noisy cafe, her eyes looking far away as if immersed in a hazy stream of thoughts. Suddenly, she pulled her hood down to cover her face, muttering complaints about the annoyances surrounding her. The rising frustration made Vivi just want to escape reality. She constantly tore at her hair in a state of absolute deadlock. Looking at her friend's pathetic state, Aang coldly concluded that whoever loves more in a relationship will definitely be the loser. The scene shifted to the quiet neighborhood at dusk, when the lights from the houses began to illuminate the night. In her private room, Vivi wore headphones and worked diligently over her notebook pages, trying hard to force herself to focus on the pile of unfinished homework. But then she suddenly paused, reaching up to scratch her head in confusion because she couldn't understand the knowledge she had just jotted down at all. Dropping her pen and letting out an exhausted sigh, the nerdy girl asked herself why her mind kept wandering even though it wasn't too late in the evening yet. Fragments of old memories suddenly resurfaced and took over her mind, making her gaze become dazed as she faced herself. Vivi slightly tilted her head to lean against the chair, her instincts urging her to seek out the image of that person one more time. Vivi gently opened the drawer and took out a small gray jewelry box that was lying quietly among the bottles of lavender essential oil. Her trembling hands popped open the lid, revealing an old yellow-brown leather strap watch tied to so many memories. She picked the item up, staring intently at the glass face that had cracked into many pieces, much like the shattering of a vow. Vivi's eyes were heavy with melancholy, while the music from her headphones took her back in time to a realm of memories. Last year's sunny autumn appeared. That guy softly touched her hand and asked Vivi to give her hand to him. In the middle of the bustling airport lobby, she looked up at him with a face full of questions about his sudden intention at this moment. He meticulously strapped the watch onto her wrist, considering it a farewell gift to remind her on his behalf to go to sleep early every day. Vivi gave a small nod of agreement, promising to remember that reminder while trying to hide the tears about to fall. The guy offered a reassuring smile, telling her not to miss him too much because 4 years of studying abroad would pass as fast as the blink of an eye. He gently pulled her into a hug, stroked her hair, and swore to return to find her as soon as he finished his journey abroad. Vivi stared blankly at the watch on her wrist, the gift from the past that was always present like a part of her body. She took it off, the palm of her hand trembling as it touched the glass face that had been jaggedly cracked since who knows when. Her gaze dropped in deep sorrow, her pupils flashing with a lingering sadness when old memories suddenly rushed back. Vivi slumped her head by the study desk, blaming herself for being so stupid to cling tightly to this item, unable to erase the silhouette of the betrayer. Suddenly her phone's screen lit up brightly, accompanied by a notification sound from Enzo Din, the strange guy who abruptly wanted to connect with her. The nerdy girl dazedly searched her memories for this unfamiliar name, then suddenly remembered this was the friend Aine had mentioned. Vivi jolted and almost fell off her chair when the other party boldly invited her to go to the movies as soon as tomorrow. The scene shifted to Urban Gym, where the bustling sounds of exercise machines chased away the quiet atmosphere of the night. Amidst the sweaty crowd, a few teasing laughs rang out, mocking the effort of training one's body with no one to look at it. Ignoring the sarcastic remarks, the male lead coldly replied that they knew nothing because someone was definitely always watching him. At the gym, his buddy curiously asked Enzo if he had successfully hit on the girl who caused an uproar in the department the other day. Enzo confidently confirmed that she was his new target while his veiny arms diligently kept lifting weights. His buddy lifted weights while expressing surprise at Enzo's sudden change in taste compared to his hot lovers in the past. The orange-haired guy smiled and admitted he was starting to get bored with strong personalities and only cared about a special feeling. Enzo passionately described Vivi's innocence that made him unable to bear touching her, and firmly believed the girl would soon become hopelessly obsessed with him. Seeing his buddy looking a bit annoyed, he triumphantly asserted that this feeling of conquest was something other guys would never understand. His buddy expressed doubt that a sophomore like her would even bat an eye at an underclassman. Enzo winked with full complacency, declaring himself a master of romance who had never failed with any girl. Right when his buddy was mocking his excessive narcissism, a text notification bell suddenly rang from the phone. Enzo flashed a victorious smile, fully convinced this was Vivi's agreement to a movie date with him. Enzo was engrossed in planning to choose an impressive outfit for their first date, but then stopped dead due to an unexpected notification. The master of romance's face completely deformed upon receiving a definitive rejection from Vivi. His friend burst into hysterical laughter, not missing the chance to mock Enzo's self-proclaimed title and tease how his never-been-rejected record was now shattered. Flying into a rage because his ego was touched, Enzo threw a thunderous kick and yelled, forcing his friend to shut his mouth immediately. The orange-haired guy still tried to salvage some honor by suggesting Vivi was just playing hard to get, even though he was told straight to his face that he was delusional. On the other side, a young man wearing a red tracksuit looked tiredly at the chaotic scene, secretly blaming how kids these days only care about flirting instead of focusing on their studies. He leaned back with a face full of disdain, dropping a comment that those guys didn't look anything like real students. According to his standards, A true student must be gentle, hardworking, and always attached to thick books of knowledge. He passionately painted an exemplary image of wearing glasses to exude an intellectual aura, even though his expression clearly showed fatigue after a workout. The entire gym was suddenly shaken by terrified screams upon witnessing a supernatural sight from the corner of the room, where a muscular arm was performing the skill of lifting weights with one hand combined with reading a book. Han Lu focused on lifting weights with one hand, his eyes still intently following every line of text in the thick book. Witnessing that bizarre scene, the guy in red secretly judged that the standard for students these days was way too weird. His headphones were actually playing a lecture on dry legal regulations instead of upbeat music. The black glove completely covering one hand made people around him suspicious of its owner's intention to hide a secret. The urban gym still maintained its frantic pace with the sound of machinery and the heavy breathing of people working out. Han decisively placed the barbell back on the rack, the sharp metallic clash signaling the end of his intense workout. He quietly returned to the locker area to put away his gear, his muscular back exuding an unapproachable loneliness. Checking his phone unexpectedly, Han Lu was surprised to see a message from Vivi asking about his preference for sweets. His fingers lightly swiped across the screen to send a refusal, as he wasn't really a fan of sugary treats. He was suddenly stunned to receive a follow-up text saying Vivi planned to bring homemade cake to tomorrow's study session, a feeling of intense regret welling up. The phone screen suddenly lit up with an excited message from Vivi, bragging that she had just baked a cake herself and would bring it to tomorrow's study session as a gift. Han Lu gave a faint, satisfied smirk, quickly sending an agreement that made the anticipation for their meeting even more palpable. Right there in the gym, the sweaty nerd couldn't help but feel amused as he secretly thought about the sweet treats his friend was about to bring him. Standing in front of his locker with a bare, muscular back, Han seemed lost in his own calculations to prepare for tomorrow's promising date. After putting on his headphones, he excitedly decided to work out for another hour to release the surging excitement in his heart. The next day, noticing the weather was less chilly, they both decided to choose an open-air cafe to change the study atmosphere and make it more comfortable. A brilliantly colorful box of macarons was suddenly displayed on the table, radiating an inviting sweetness, just like the dedication of the one who made it. Sitting across from him under the green canopy, Vivi thoughtfully invited Han to enjoy them, saying this was a special batch she made just for him to recharge after hours of hard tutoring. With sparkling, expectant eyes, the beautiful girl affirmed that she had poured her heart into this and earnestly hoped he would taste it and let her know his thoughts. Han Lu slowly picked up a pastry, his eyes behind his glasses wavering slightly as he complimented that they looked truly amazing. Han Lu stared suspiciously at the red pastry in his hand, letting out a soft gasp of surprise. He slowly put the pastry in his mouth to chew, trying to appreciate the result that Vivi had dedicated all her effort to make. Suddenly Han's face changed color, turning pale and dark as if his taste buds had just endured a horrifying torture. Seeing his bizarre expression, Vivi anxiously bombarded him with questions about whether the pastry she baked was really that bad. Hurriedly covering his mouth with his hand to keep himself from throwing up, Han Lu awkwardly explained that the pastry was so good it left him completely speechless. Believing that sweet lie, Vivi enthusiastically forced Han to try the other ones, leaving him to resign himself to suffering. The nerd threw his head back in pure despair, trying to swallow the pile of pastries while Vivi kept asking how they tasted. Han slumped onto the table in tears, screaming internally about the food's horror, while still having to lie to the girl's face that it was fantastic. Deciding to stop eating and start studying, Vivi excitedly claimed that the chilly outdoor air actually made her feel more energized. She told herself that sitting here would make it harder to fall asleep, and she still felt incredibly embarrassed whenever she remembered the shameful incident from the other day. Shock was clearly visible in Vivi's eyes as she suddenly woke up with an utterly bewildered expression. She jumped up from the study table and frantically wondered how long she had accidentally fallen asleep. Vivi confusingly turned to ask Han Lu why he didn't wake her up when she saw him still engrossed in his book pages. Han gave a slight nod, confirming that he had been here reading the whole time, despite his arm going numb from letting his friend use it as a pillow throughout the session. Vivi couldn't help but feel a surge of guilt seeing Han working so hard to tutor her while she dozed off, making a firm resolution to stay completely awake from now on. With a blazing, fiery determination, she declared she would study seriously, while Han told her to feel free to ask if she ran into any difficulties. High above, white clouds drifted lazily across the deep blue sky, as if marking a transition in the atmosphere. Han Lu quietly rested his chin on his hand, his distant gaze seemingly holding hidden thoughts that couldn't be put into words. He slightly tilted his head to observe, his eyes behind his glasses suddenly becoming gentler upon spotting a tiny figure approaching. In front of him was a small dog with pleading eyes, making Han feel sympathetic as he remarked that it looked so skinny, as if it had been starved for a very long time. Han Lu coldly shooed the little dog away, loudly stating that there was absolutely nothing here for it. Despite the harsh rejection, the dog persistently stood there wagging its tail, as if waiting for a chance from the two of them. Han suddenly paused for a moment, a subtly calculating gleam appearing in his thoughtful eyes. He gave a smug smirk, telling himself that there was actually a perfectly flawless way to get rid of that pile of pastries. The poor dog could only look blankly at Han with wide, round eyes, completely unaware that it was about to become the guy's savior. Vivi was about to ask Han about something in the lesson when she suddenly froze, discovering something incredibly unbelievable. She couldn't help but be shocked, exclaiming in astonishment at the thought that Han was actually someone who was extremely passionate about sweets. The pastry box she had painstakingly prepared with her own hands was now completely empty, leaving no trace behind. Vivi's heart burst with happiness. She clasped her hands in emotion and asked if he really loved her cooking skills that much. Han Lu quietly looked at the back of the dog that had just feasted to its heart's content, hastily stopping Vivi when he heard her excitedly promise to make a lot more pastries next time. Vivi enthusiastically boasted that next time she would make him a strawberry garlic chili pastry, a bizarre combination that left the listener frozen in shock. Immediately, the poor dog started vomiting because it couldn't digest it, leaving Han Lu horrified and wondering why such a terrifying pastry existed in this world. Trying to push the trauma of sweets aside, Han returned to his usual serious demeanor and asked Vivi about the questions she was having with the lesson. She wondered about the cross-docking strategy and questioned why it became a double-edged sword for companies without sufficient management capabilities. While operating his computer, Han explained that in traditional logistics, warehouses act like safety airbags to absorb any unexpected shocks. He emphasized that if the information flow couldn't synchronize with the goods, just one small mistake at the input stage was enough to completely paralyze the distribution system. After a thorough explanation, Han told Vivi to open her laptop so he could send an illustrated diagram to give her a more intuitive view. Vivi hesitantly mentioned that her computer was broken, so she didn't bring it, while timidly asking if she could view the diagram on her phone instead. At her request, the nerd suddenly stood right up and grabbed his own laptop, leaving Vivi utterly bewildered by the surprise. Han quietly used his hand to pull the chair right next to his friend, a decisive gesture as if to narrow the distance so the tutoring session could proceed more effectively. Han Lu quietly observed Vivi's bewildered expression as he unexpectedly moved closer and looked deeply into her eyes with a hidden meaning. He spoke up, suggesting he would sit right here, so they could both look at the diagram on his computer for maximum convenience. Han decisively pulled the chair close, making Vivi nervously hesitate to agree while the surrounding space suddenly felt cramped. Looking at the nerd's sturdy back, she couldn't help but feel suspicious, secretly wondering if he was acting excessively weird. In the distance, a group of students gathered, laughing delightedly as they spotted the adorable chubby dog wandering nearby. Returning to the lesson, Vivi began to understand that the system's essence was eliminating any delays instead of passively holding goods in a warehouse. Han gave a slight nod, comparing the old method to a closed-off person who always demands too many cumbersome procedures before they can be approached. He pointed at the diagram to prove that complete proactivity was the key to breaking down all operational barriers. With no more dividing walls or defensive delays, every process was now geared toward direct and rapid interaction. Han affirmed that he preferred this straightforwardness because it didn't waste time on guesswork, while also telling Vivi to scoot even closer to him to avoid the harsh midday sun. While Vivi was still engrossed in the pile of documents, Han Lu's hand subtly reached out and gripped the leg of the girl's chair. Vivi turned to look at him questioningly, asking if he thought this was a change that would bring higher efficiency. Without a word in response, the nerd decisively used force to pull Vivi's chair hard right next to his side in a bold manner. This sudden initiative left Vivi completely stunned, her face clearly showing shock at the other person's decisive action. In a panic, she instinctively reached out to grab Han's firm arm to seek balance when being pulled so unexpectedly. Han smirked slightly and affirmed that a direct approach like this would definitely bring much better results. Sitting right beside him, Vivi suddenly realized that this valedictorian no longer seemed to have the hesitation or reluctance he had initially. The two just sat next to each other in an incredibly intimate posture, making the surrounding atmosphere suddenly become strangely quiet. Observing his demeanor, Vivi told herself that lately he had really undergone some wildly different changes. Today was no exception, and the scene of Nexus Tech University appeared, signaling an upcoming, highly dramatic new chapter. In the middle of the Nexus Tech University campus, a student couple was taking a stroll when they suddenly noticed the large silhouette of someone squatting hidden behind the bushes. The male student softly uttered a timid greeting, but it seemed the person didn't care in the slightest about their presence. It was none other than the school boss, Kane Duong. He was pressing his phone to his ear, growling at the other end of the line about why the shipment was short. Witnessing that gloomy scene, the couple began whispering in utter terror, realizing the guy with a notorious mafia background was doing something secretive. Ignoring everything around him, Kane coldly and firmly asserted that the entire shipment would be fully transported this afternoon. As soon as he finished speaking, he reached out and hoisted a pitch-black kitten up into the air, telling the person on the line to rest assured because everything had been arranged. The next words coming out of Kane's mouth made the atmosphere suddenly freeze when he declared that all the internal organs would be fully accounted for. With a sinister smile clearly showing on his darkened face, he even brazenly offered to supply human parts if the client requested it. Too terrified by the confession about the infamous organ trafficking ring, the couple hastily fled, fearing the little cat was about to be slaughtered for parts. Witnessing the entire event from behind, Vivi stood frozen with a dazed face, horrified as she wondered what on earth she had just heard. Vivi shuddered at the thought that the rumors about Kane Duong being a mafia organ trafficker turned out to be true. She told herself she had to flee from here immediately. But then she suddenly stopped in hesitation, her heart undeniably worried about the fate of the little cat, wondering what on earth she should do right now. The image of the tiny black cat with innocent, round eyes appeared, a fragile little life resting snugly in the hand of the one considered the Grim Reaper. Standing from afar observing Kane silently squatting in the bushes, Vivi took a deep breath to prepare for her most reckless decision ever. Overcoming her fear, she suddenly yelled loudly and dashed straight in, as if to rescue that tiny life from the clutches of the school boss. Contrary to expectations, Kane suddenly flashed a radiant smile and gave a friendly good morning greeting, leaving Vivi stunned because he looked like a completely different person. Sitting down next to him, Vivi curiously asked about the cat and received the answer that it was just a stray cat at school and he was feeding it a rice ball. She gently reached out to pet the little cat, secretly breathing a sigh of relief knowing he had no intention of harming it like those malicious rumors. Right at that moment, the silhouette of the mother cat suddenly appeared, quietly approaching to look for her little baby. Watching the mother cat walking trustingly beside the school boss, Vivi smiled to herself and realized Kane actually had a surprisingly warm soul. Unexpectedly scratched hard on the hand by the mother cat while trying to pet it, Vivi could only cry out in pain. She rubbed her hand while looking at the mother cat fluffing its fur to protect its child, while Kane remained sitting quietly nearby observing the situation. Dispelling all misunderstandings, the two sat down on the lush green grass and gave each other more sympathetic looks than before. The atmosphere suddenly became lighthearted as the school boss and the schoolgirl bowed their heads and chuckled at the adorable incident just now. Kane looked at Vivi with a rarely seen gentle gaze, affirming that her action of saving the cat earlier was truly very cute. The scene shifted to the classroom hallway, where the silhouettes of students were rushing to make it to class on time. Sitting in the classroom, Kane spoke up to explain that it was just a disastrous misunderstanding as his family actually ran a slaughterhouse business. Vivi burst out laughing at the correction about human organ trafficking, leaving the surrounding friends utterly astounded by the intimacy between the two. The group of students started whispering maliciously, wondering why she would get involved with both the mafia and the weird nerd. Amidst the disparaging remarks, a pair of black and white sneakers slowly walked over, bringing the silent presence of the person who was just mentioned. A close-up of Han Lu's face with a baseball cap pulled low to cover half his face, The nerd seemed to be secretly observing everything with an extremely stern expression. His sharp eyes hidden behind glasses narrowed slightly in a calculating manner, focusing on the conversation happening right in front of him. Meanwhile, Kane Duong was clutching his stomach and complaining with a pitiful face that he had given all his rice balls to the kitten, so he was currently starving. Seeing that, Vivi immediately bent down to rummage through her bag and told the school boss to drink this carton of milk to stave off hunger before going to eat something decent during the break. She excitedly held out the orange milk carton in front of Kane, not forgetting to advertise that its flavor was incredibly addictive and he would surely love it. Vivi suddenly felt an unusually murderous aura, so she quickly turned around to look with eyes full of suspicion and worry. Standing right behind her was Han Lu with an ice-cold expression, making her questioningly ask why he was standing there motionless like a statue. Without a word of explanation, Han's firm hand suddenly reached out and decisively gripped the edge of the empty chair. He nonchalantly declared that from now on he would sit in this spot and deliberately mispronounced Kane's name as Jane, causing the school boss to frustratingly correct him immediately. Han Lu casually took the milk carton from Vivi's hand and advised her not to drink on an empty stomach because it could easily cause stomachaches, while he himself was feeling incredibly full. Han Lu decisively poked the straw into the milk carton while Kane Duong could only stand and watch with full regret, crying internally over the drink that was just snatched away. The nerd casually sucked the milk carton dry in the blink of an eye, leaving Vivi astounded at his speed and intense passion for sweets. While the professor was passionately lecturing next to the data board, the atmosphere in the classroom suddenly became stifling with everyone's own calculations. Sitting right next to Vivi, Han Lu slightly rested his head to observe and secretly realized an interesting truth he had never known all this time. It turned out the real reason her grades were always terrible was that she was just engrossed in watching short videos instead of focusing on studying. Looking at Vivi slumped on the table looking tired, Han suddenly felt truly lucky to have the opportunity to be close and observe her from this distance. He quickly returned to intense concentration on his computer, trying to complete his work as perfectly as possible. Suddenly Kane approached and offered to join because he had unfortunately forgotten almost all of his knowledge after a year of deferring his studies. The school boss excitedly mentioned the fact that Han was tutoring Vivi, hoping to receive a nod of agreement from the valedictorian. But the response to that enthusiasm was only a harsh refusal and a cold glare from Han Lu, affirming that he was currently extremely busy. Han Lu worked diligently on his computer, ignoring Kane Duong, who was slumping his face on the desk and sobbing bitterly right behind his back. Finally, what had to come came. A bizarre study group was officially formed with the excitement of 2 members, but left Vivi welling up with a highly unstable premonition. She excitedly rested her chin on her hand and congratulated Han because he finally had a second college friend, while curiously asking if the guy was truly happy or not. In response to that enthusiasm was Han Lu's pensive face and coldly shut eyes, making Vivi secretly affirm that the answer was definitely no. Deciding to brush everything aside, she placed her hand on the table and called for the whole group to give their all to conquer the tough upcoming exams. Immediately, Kane's large hand also reached out as if to respond to his little friend's determined call. Both Kane and Vivi poured their expectant gazes toward the valedictorian, while Han maintained a stern, incomprehensible crossed-arms attitude. After a dramatically silent moment, Han Lu slightly adjusted his glasses frames and finally accepted, dropping a word of agreement to execute this plan. 3 hands stacked tightly on top of each other, marking a joint commitment among people with completely opposite personalities. The whole group chanted their determination slogan in unison while Han kept his cold, nerdy expression in the center of the formation. The coffee shop space was immersed in soft yellow light, creating an incredibly quiet and focused study atmosphere. Under the modern track lighting, the group of young friends sat together to prepare for the toughest battle of the semester. When Kane Duong awkwardly asked for an explanation of a difficult concept, Han Lu casually handed him a thick book and told him to study it thoroughly by himself. The school boss was stunned by the thickness of the material while Han turned to ask about Vivi's situation, and she quickly affirmed she was still fine. Sitting quietly in a corner, Vivi gently placed her hand on the table. It seemed in her mind she was harboring some special intention for her savior. Han Lu, deeply engrossed in the book pages, suddenly paused when he heard his friend softly and hesitantly call his name. The The valedictorian slowly looked up, his eyes behind his glasses suddenly becoming deeper and more attentive than ever as he faced the girl. Vivi beamed a bright smile and excitedly declared that after the exams, she would definitely treat him to a luxurious dinner as a thank you. Hearing that, the nerd immediately reached up to adjust his glasses and coldly stated that she absolutely didn't need to do so. Han asserted that he helped because he wanted to, not for reward, and at the same time told her to just focus her energy on achieving the best possible results in the exams. Vivi endlessly persuaded Han to accept the invitation because she didn't want him to feel like he was working hard to tutor her for free. She excitedly mentioned that the timing would also perfectly coincide with Christmas, a flawless opportunity for them to relax together. Han Lu pensively listened to the proposal of treating that dinner like an early Christmas outing, making the atmosphere suddenly unusually stirring. While engrossed in the discussion, Vivi suddenly turned to ask if Kane wanted to join the upcoming celebratory feast or not. She could only cry to the heavens seeing that the school boss Kane had fallen asleep ages ago, with a thick book covering his face right at the study desk. Seeing his companion completely knocked out from exhaustion, Han Lu slightly raised an eyebrow to observe with a highly composed expression. The nerd smirked slightly, asserting that Kane definitely wouldn't be able to wake up, and suggested the two of them should just go separately together. The next 2 weeks passed as fast as a tornado. The group of 3 diligently studied together in the library regardless of day or night. They ate and drank together, taking advantage of every precious minute to absorb more knowledge, creating an incredibly determined scene at the cafeteria. Although only Vivi and Kane frequently dozed off from overload, the entire group's perseverance helped them step steadily into the challenging final exam week. Thanks to Han Lu's dedicated and thorough explanations, Vivi's exams went incredibly smoothly and favorably. The final subject was a highly pressurized presentation in front of the global business strategy professor, known for being extremely strict. With a thoughtful face, the professor frankly commented that her strategy was still quite vague and somewhat detached from reality. He continued to analyze that this was also natural since she was still a student and had absolutely no practical combat experience in businesses. However, after a while of evaluating, the professor suddenly changed his tone to praise the creativity and incredibly solid knowledge foundation in her work. Vivi burst into happiness and profusely thanked him upon receiving official notification from the professor that she had completed the course. Walking out of the building looking exhausted, she both breathed a sigh of relief and secretly complained about a draining and tiring final exam period. Right in the quiet hallway, Vivi was incredibly surprised to catch sight of Han Lu's silhouette still standing there absorbed in his book pages. She curiously approached to ask why he hadn't gone home yet, while wondering if the renowned valedictorian's exam had run into any trouble. Answering that concern was an incomprehensible silence from Han, making Vivi press him by asking if his exam results were truly that bad. Vivi's footsteps echoed softly as she slowly approached Han Lu with an incredibly excited expression. She couldn't contain her joy and shouted loudly that she had passed the exams, simultaneously grasping the nerd's hand tightly to share this achievement. Han Lu stood frozen in surprise at his friend's sudden intimate action, his face momentarily becoming unusually flustered. Vivi beamed a happy smile, asserting that all these good results were thanks to Han's immense effort in wholeheartedly teaching her over the past time. She continued to jump and cheer in utter joy because she had finally escaped the obsession named exams. Suddenly she stopped, realizing she was making overly intimate gestures with him, causing the atmosphere to quickly become extremely awkward. With a face flushed red from embarrassment, Vivi hurriedly let go of his hand and mumbled an apology for being so excited that she lost control. Han Lu coughed softly to hide his embarrassment, while suggesting doing something special to commemorate this memorable moment. Vivi suddenly came up with a bold idea and excitedly suggested they both head out to the beach right away to enjoy the feeling of freedom. To Han's astonishment, she affirmed that if they went now they could catch the sunset falling, leaving the guy to just nod in agreement while still wondering about transportation. Vivi suddenly became extremely serious as she looked deeply into Han Lu's eyes with a completely mysterious look. Han Lu stood dumbfounded in amazement, as if he still couldn't believe what he had just heard. The nerd stuttered wordlessly upon encountering an incredibly unbelievable sight right in front of the school gate. Vivi was proudly sitting on a badass heavy-duty motorcycle, her hands gripping the handlebars tightly with an extremely confident face. Hanlu couldn't help but ask in shock if she was really the one driving this massive and powerful vehicle. Wearing a vibrant pink helmet, Vivi excitedly revealed that this was a borrowed bike from her best friend Ain, and invited Han to hurry up and hop on so she could give him a ride. Han anxiously bombarded her with questions about whether she had a driver's license, and if she could really handle this oversized bike on the road. Looking at Vivi's tiny figure next to the colossal bike, a fear secretly arose in Han about whether she was strong enough to carry a tall person like him. Despite all doubts, Vivi still enthusiastically protected Han's genius brain by personally putting a helmet on him and secretly taking pride in her gallantry. Despite the bad premonitions surrounding him, Hanlu could only stand and watch Vivi enthusiastically waving her hand, inviting him on a risky journey. Vivi proactively asked Han to give her his backpack to carry so he could have his hands free to sit steadily in the back. While Hanlu could only close his eyes and pray for safety, she was already ready to hit the gas and take off at a terrifying speed. At a street corner, Enzo Din quietly stood watching the silhouette of the motorcycle gliding away in bewilderment. The friend tagging along didn't forget to bring up Vivi's previous commotion and seemed extremely curious about the identity of the guy with her. He even ruthlessly mocked Enzo that the guy wouldn't have a single chance since he had even been rejected by her for a meetup. With a bitterly romantic smile, Enzo ruffled his hair, admitting that he was going through the painful feeling of being lovelorn. At the same time on the road, a yellow school bus was slowly moving amidst the bustling traffic. Inside the bus, the teacher was passionately lecturing on the topic of traffic safety and posing tough questions for the whole class to debate. A student confidently affirmed that safe driving meant sticking to the speed limit and absolutely not performing reckless actions. Just as the teacher was about to nod in praise, the motorcycle carrying Vivi and Hanlu zoomed past like a flash of lightning, creating a highly dramatic irony. The kids on the bus stared blankly after the black shadow that just flashed by, wondering if the superhero The Flash had just manifested himself. The sight of the motorcycle weaving through the heavy traffic at breakneck speed made pedestrians compare this to a true F1 racer. Vivi frantically twisted the throttle and sped off while Hanlu could only cling tightly to the bike with a terrified expression and his hair blowing wildly in the wind. Despite Han desperately begging her to drive more safely, she nonchalantly replied that she hadn't crashed into anyone yet. Unable to endure the violent shaking any longer, the nerd quickly covered his mouth to suppress his nausea and screamed, demanding that she let him off the bike immediately. The motorcycle finally stopped right at the edge of the curb, ending a breathless and dangerous racing spectacle. The moment his feet touched the ground, Hanlu rushed to a nearby tree and threw up everything in his stomach in an incredibly pathetic state. Looking at his exhausted appearance, Vivi even teased that it was her first time seeing someone get motorcycle sick, making a furious Han assert that her driving was an absolute chaos. She hurriedly rubbed his back to reassure him and promised to go slower, while anxiously asking if he felt better to continue the journey. Hanlu stood up decisively, affirmed that he was fine, and declared that for the next leg of the trip, he would be the one driving. Hanlu decisively grabbed the backpack and demanded Vivi hand it to him so he could drive himself, leaving her completely stunned. After 2 hours of traversing the long distance from the city, the picturesque beach suddenly appeared before their eyes, making Vivi cheer in pure excitement. She passionately gazed at the vast water sparkling under the afternoon sun and continuously praised the exquisite beauty of nature. The scenery unfolded like a giant strip of golden silk, where the last rays of the day gently touched each wave to create countless shimmering shards of light. Meanwhile, Hanlu's hand subtly adjusted the motorcycle's rearview mirror in preparation for a highly suggestive action. The image of Vivi beaming a happy smile was suddenly reflected clearly in the mirror, causing the nerd's heart to skip a beat. With a completely resolute face hidden behind the black visor of the helmet, Han focused on controlling the bike to glide powerfully along the coastal road. They were both immersed in their own happiness, while Vivi excitedly spread her arms wide to embrace the cool ocean breeze. The murmuring sound of waves crashing onto the sand felt like a soothing melody, marking a rare peaceful moment after days of stressful exams. Vivi excitedly dashed toward the vast blue sea with a shout full of freedom, leaving all pressures behind to fully immerse herself in the beautiful nature. Han Lu sneezed continuously due to the biting cold of the winter sea and anxiously asked if Vivi was feeling cold. Vivi casually glided across the sand and teased Han that if he lived in Russia or Canada, he would definitely turn into an iceberg. Han thoughtfully looked toward the sunset horizon, softly admitting that he had actually been frozen in winters in Canada. Vivi turned to look at him with utterly astounded eyes, wonderingly asking if it was just a simple vacation trip. She was completely shocked upon seeing the image of old backpacks, then asked in amazement if he had really gone to study abroad all by himself at the age of 12. Vivi spared no words in praising his independence and was curious to know the real reason that made him decide to return to his home country in high school. Han Lu looked out at the vast sea with a sturdy back, softly opening up that he simply wanted to be closer to his family. The two of them quietly watched the sun gradually set into the sea. Vivi softly exclaimed that indeed there was no place as peaceful as one's own home. The little girl excitedly intended to dash into the water to play, causing Han to panic and stop her out of fear that the temperature was already too low right now. Han Lu gently reached out and tightly grasped Vivi's wrist, silently marveling that he had never dared to dream there would be a day he could be this close to her. Vivi turned back to look at Han with a radiant smile, her eyes sparkling as if containing an entire galaxy, and excitedly challenged him not to fear the cold. That gaze made Han tell himself that he had forgotten all of life's burdens, but eventually, reason pulled him back to reality. Vivi gently reached out to touch his sleeve, a caring gesture that made Han feel as if he was losing his inherent vigilance. She quietly turned her back to stand facing the sea, letting the wind blow her long hair wildly amidst the breathtakingly beautiful sunset scenery. Vivi glanced back with a melancholy look in her eyes. It seemed a fragment of memory had just flashed by and stirred her soul. The scene suddenly shifted to a dark room, where Vivi sat lonely by the window, recalling the dark days when the sun no longer shone just for her. Han's footsteps slowly tread on the fine sand, as if he was trying to suppress the emotions surging in his heart. He decisively turned his back and walked away, leaving behind solitary footprints on the vast, deserted beach. Han coldly declared that it was time to head back because it was getting dark and the road was very dangerous, leaving Vivi extremely bewildered by this sudden change. Watching Han's silhouette fade away, Vivi took off her sand-covered shoe while secretly wondering what on earth had made him suddenly become so cold. Amidst the desolate space of the beach, Vivi was startled in terror upon hearing the highly mocking greeting of a stranger. Two local youths with sinister smiles appeared, throwing flirtatious remarks and inviting her to go drink with them. Realizing the imminent danger, Vivi turned her head and ran for her life in absolute panic. In her haste, she even dropped her shoe, but her legs still tried to dash away to escape the pursuit of those perverts. The guy in the red jacket chased closely behind, jokingly asking why she had to run when they hadn't even had the chance to get acquainted yet. He suddenly reached out and tightly grabbed Vivi's wrist, violently halting the little girl's effort to escape. Vivi struggled intensely and screamed, demanding him to let go, but her strength was completely hopeless against the muscular man. That bastard stuck his foot out to trip her, causing Vivi to fall painfully, her body collapsing onto the sand. He stood looking down from above with full smugness, mockingly saying that she was overreacting even though they hadn't done anything yet. Vivi tremblingly clutched her head and threatened to call the police, but that only made the youth even more amused and toss out a cold challenge. Vivi curled herself up on the sand, sobbing bitterly while pleading with the evildoers not to touch her. In her most desperate moment, a veiny, powerful hand unexpectedly reached out to shield her, leaving her stunned in amazement. Han Lu appeared like a guardian angel. He gently lifted her head and called Vivi's name to calm her panicked state of mind. Looking at the calloused yet warm hands wrapping around her, Vivi heard the promise that everything was fine now. He firmly assured her that he was here, his eyes behind the glasses suddenly turning unusually sharp and cold. Han Lu asked Vivi to rest assured and let him personally deal with the bastards harassing her. Witnessing that scene, the two thugs couldn't help but laugh, mocking that this was no different from a cheap hero saving the beauty movie. Despite the taunts, Han Lu coldly ordered them to apologize to her immediately and get out of his sight. The guy in red still hadn't realized the danger. He continued to laugh and mock the nerd who was intentionally playing a badass role in front of his girlfriend. However, his smile suddenly died away when he caught Han Lu's intensely pressuring gaze, making him sense an ominous sign approaching. Han Lu stood towering with his fists clenched, coldly demanding the thugs apologize to Vivi and get lost immediately. The guy in red smirked and mockingly said that his badass act was over, then threatened to see if he knew whose territory this was. Standing behind, Vivi dazedly followed that silhouette with a confused state of mind and wondered what was really happening. Ignoring the aggressive lackeys flocking to surround them, Han still calmly retorted that they were the ones who needed to scram from here. Surrounded by dozens of local hooligans, Han Lu's solitary figure exuded an incredibly terrifying invisible pressure. Suddenly Vivi paused slightly, her eyes widening in sheer shock at an incredibly earth-shattering realization in her mind. She silently mused how this scene was so familiar, as if a painful memory fragment was gradually returning. Looking from behind, Vivi horrifyingly realized that Han Lu's silhouette looked exactly like the man who had betrayed her years ago. Han Lu reached up to slick back his hair with a face full of boredom. It seemed he was gradually peeling off his nerd mask. The eyes behind his glasses suddenly became sharp, cold, and full of murderous intent, ready to punish anyone who dared to touch his limits. Han Lu suddenly turned around as if to leave, making the guy in red confusedly ask where he was trying to go. Vivi worriedly looked at the overwhelming number of enemies, but Han calmly asked her to stand up and inquired if she could run fast. Receiving an affirmative answer from Vivi, Han immediately grabbed her hand and ordered that they would both run away when he counted to 3. The count of 1 just sounded, leaving Vivi utterly stunned. She shockingly asked back if he was really going to do it right now. The number 2 rang out while the crowd behind was still mocking that the young couple was holding hands to say their final goodbyes. At the 3rd count, Han Lu's veiny hand tightly squeezed Vivi's hand like an affirmation for the beginning of their escape. He shouted Vivi's name loudly and pulled her to sprint off rapidly, leaving behind the encirclement of the aggressive thugs. The thugs behind furiously screamed and cursed him as a coward, while ordering the whole group to pursue immediately. The night gradually fell, blanketing the old roofs, where antennas stretched out solitarily against the gloomy sky. Under the dim light of the small street, an old lady sitting in a wheelchair quietly hugged a little cat in front of a tightly closed iron gate. Vivi and Han Lu were hurriedly running past an old lady in a wheelchair. She still didn't forget to greet her politely, making the old lady smile nostalgically about her youth. Right after that was the gang of thugs chasing closely behind. They greeted the old lady while questioning the true reason for this meaningless chase. The local youths aggressively screamed, demanding the two to stop, their faces clearly showing fatigue from having to exert themselves running. Vivi panted fearfully as she felt the enemies gradually closing the gap. She frantically asked Han what to do next. Amidst the panic, she suddenly halted in sheer amazement at an unexpected situation happening right before her eyes. The gang of hooligans cursed angrily upon realizing they had entered a dead end. They looked around in confusion to search for the whereabouts of the vanished prey. In reality, Han Lu had pulled Vivi to hide closely in a dark corner of the small alley. The two stood tightly against each other and tried to suppress their rapid breathing to avoid being discovered. Meanwhile, in another place, a group of strangers was discussing how clashing with Hang Thursday high school students was a fatal mistake because of the tremendously powerful backing forces. One henchman began to feel hesitant and worried, but the leader brushed it off and affirmed that they were just working on the boss's orders. They looked at Vivi's family photo and mocked her ordinary background, while wondering how a poor student could get into that prestigious school. Memories of a 10th grade Vivi cowering in fear returned, while the bullies joked that she looked much cuter in real life than in pictures. They casually discussed confining her to wait for their grounded boss to find a way to sneak out, leaving Vivi to only sob in despair. Her eyes burned with absolute resentment when she recognized that those bastards were students from the notoriously infamous Honglak High School. Returning to reality, Vivi sighed softly upon recalling last night's nightmare and secretly worried that Han Lu would catch a cold for giving his jacket to her. She and her close group of friends blended into the bustling crowd at this year's festival, where the atmosphere was much livelier and more crowded than usual. Vivi silently complained that her post-exam break had vanished into thin air since she had to volunteer at the Christmas market to earn training points. Her friends excitedly dragged her to get a tarot reading at the booth ahead, even though Vivi just wanted to find a place to rest after the stressful days. While passing by the handicraft stall, the shop owner's invitation to buy woolen scarves as Christmas gifts suddenly caught her attention. Vivi suddenly had the idea of finding a thank you gift for Hanlu, so she decided to stop by to directly check out the scarf designs. She gently touched the dark blue hand-knitted woolen scarf and was secretly pleased with the softness, as well as the warmth this gift would bring. The stall owner warmly introduced that all profits from selling scarves would be donated to the local orphanage. Hearing this, Vivi nodded slightly and then unconsciously asked a curious question about the fate of the helpless children. She pondered thoughtfully that if a child lost their relatives and didn't go to an orphanage, how would they survive in this vast world? The shop owner awkwardly admitted to never having thought about it and guessed that those children could only fend for themselves to survive. Vivi absent-mindedly wondered if the world would ever truly open its arms to embrace those who inherently had no one to lean on. A surge of pity made her immediately decide to buy the blue woolen scarf as a way to share some warmth with the little ones. She generously left all the change as a donation, making the shop owner extremely grateful and continuously expressing thanks. Meanwhile, a mysterious camera lens from afar was silently capturing every radiant moment of Vivi right at the festival. The person holding the camera patiently watched as she turned around to leave with a smile still lingering on her lips. Suddenly sensing someone stealthily observing her through a lens, Vivi startled and looked back with eyes full of suspicion and worry. The unexpected sound of a camera shutter clicking right behind her made Vivi startle and turn around amidst the bustling Christmas stalls. The person holding the camera was Enzo Din. He excitedly complimented her for looking so adorable and asked her to strike another pose for him to work. He confidently approached with a sly smile, simultaneously calling out his senior Vivi's name directly as a way to assert their acquaintance. Faced with that aggressiveness, Vivi just blankly asked who he really was, leaving Enzo completely shocked because he was entirely forgotten by her. After a while of trying to jog her memory, Vivi vaguely recognized this was the junior student and also a friend of Ain's. She mistakenly called his name Andy, forcing Enzo to hastily correct her and casually flirt that she was so incredibly pretty he couldn't stop taking pictures. Enzo explained he was reporting on the festival for the media club but had decided to choose her as the main character for today. He suddenly closed the distance and reproached Vivi for frequently ignoring his messages, making meeting her even harder than seeing the president. Vivi hurriedly dodged and explained that she had almost collapsed due to final exams, so she completely had no mind to chat with anyone. Understanding the reason, Enzo immediately seized the opportunity to invite her to dinner tomorrow to celebrate the approaching Christmas holiday. Vivi wondered about Enzo's invitation on the evening of the 24th, while she already had a dining appointment with Han on the 25th, secretly amazed at her unexpectedly busy schedule. Enzo tried his best to insist and promised to take gorgeous photos for her, making Vivi curious to ask to review the pictures he had just captured. The two put their heads together to check the results on the camera, creating a rather intimate moment amidst the bustling atmosphere of the festival. Vivi couldn't hide her astonishment at Enzo's excellent skills, while the male student clearly showed his smugness upon receiving praise from his senior. Enzo decisively locked the appointment at exactly 6 p.m. tomorrow and secretly triumphed, assuming Vivi was still single, which was why she accepted his invitation. At that moment, Ain's call echoing from afar interrupted the profoundly suggestive private conversation between the two. Enzo waved goodbye to his senior to return to his filming job, leaving Vivi standing there with a mood still slightly flustered. Ain immediately approached and interrogated her about the whispering conversation just now, but Vivi just calmly replied that the two accidentally bumped into each other while Enzo was working. Refusing to let it go, the best friend continued to press for details about their romantic progress, making Vivi blush and confess about the dinner invitation for tomorrow night. Ain advised Vivi to open her heart to forget the sorrowful past, simultaneously dragging her into a tarot booth to discover predictions about her future. The fortune teller with flowing black hair smiled to welcome her clients and asked what Vivi wanted to explore in today's reading. Vivi expectantly asked about her upcoming love life, whether a new figure would step into her life or not. The Hierophant and Two of Cups cards were revealed, signaling a new breeze about to blow through, bringing fascinating romantic connections. That person was described as a calm guy, full of wisdom and depth like an ancient book that gets more captivating the more you read. But the appearance of another person with a bouquet in hand brought a sweet romantic feeling, making Vivi easily let her guard down. Those descriptions left Vivi stunned because they felt so incredibly familiar. She secretly wondered if this could be a solid pillar of support for her. The card of 3 swords piercing a heart along with the moon appeared as a warning about deceit and hidden cracks between 2 souls. The fortune teller affirmed a third person would soon appear to expose all the darkest secrets to the light, creating inevitable conflicts. Facing these ominous premonitions, Vivi tremblingly asked if the two could ultimately end up together or not. The reverse chariot card was drawn last, making the space suddenly fall silent with an answer still left open. The fortune teller flipped over the reverse chariot card and affirmed that the cards did not dictate destiny but only reflected their own choices. She continued to analyze that the bond between both sides depended entirely on whether they were brave enough to expose their inner scars to each other or not. Vivi lowered her face with a gloomy expression, silently complaining why these prophecies sounded so heartbreaking and pessimistic. Contrary to her best friend's breakdown, Ain excitedly interrupted and declared it was her turn to uncover the secrets of fate. The friend placed her hands on the deck with a nervous look, anxiously asking about her current relationship as she felt the two were gradually drifting apart. The 7 of Swords card appeared, signaling a dark shadow obscuring the light, showing that one of the two was actually directing their heart towards another horizon. Hearing that her lover had other intentions, Ain was utterly shocked and couldn't believe what the fortune teller had just revealed. Christmas Eve finally arrived, the whole city immersed in warm yellow lights along with the bustling crowds of people creating a jubilant festive atmosphere. Enzo Din took Vivi to a luxurious restaurant and confidently claimed this was his favorite spot with top-tier food quality. Sitting opposite the flirtatious guy, Vivi admitted she frequently passed by here but had never actually stepped inside to taste the flavors of this place. Vivi was surprised when Enzo gently pushed a small gift box with a blue bow toward her amidst the luxurious space of the restaurant. It turned out to be an elegant lipstick along with a warm Christmas greeting that the junior student had secretly prepared in advance. Vivi awkwardly accepted the gift and secretly felt guilty because she hadn't prepared anything at all to return the favor. Enzo tactfully reassured her that agreeing to have dinner with him was already the greatest gift, making Vivi secretly judge him as an extremely smooth talker. He excitedly opened the menu and enthusiastically introduced a highly appealing signature dish she absolutely had to try. With a confident and professional demeanor, Enzo quickly raised his hand to call the waiter to start ordering. He casually joked with the waiter that Vivi wasn't his girlfriend yet, but he was trying his hardest to make that a reality. Enzo also thoughtfully instructed the kitchen to prioritize making it fast because he didn't want to make her wait long, showing incredibly meticulous care. Looking at his lively demeanor, Vivi secretly marveled at the extroversion and masterful ability to control the atmosphere of the flirtatious guy. She suddenly associated it with tomorrow's date with Han Lu and worried whether his usual silence would make them both feel awkward or not. Han Lu sat quietly in a dark corner of the restaurant, his figure hidden behind a thick black coat. He slightly raised the menu to cover half his face, his eyes full of suspicion, wondering exactly who Vivi was dining with. Actually, he was just accidentally passing by the street and unexpectedly caught sight of the little girl's familiar silhouette. Seeing Vivi smiling radiantly next to the young man with fiery red hair, Han's heart suddenly swelled with an indescribable discomfort. Unable to restrain himself, he had secretly followed them inside and chosen a spot right behind to observe. Han wondered why someone who usually only hung out with female friends like Vivi would suddenly wear an alluring off-the-shoulder shirt to meet that guy. He squinted his eyes to assess the redhead, who looked really suspicious, but at the same time felt his face had something very familiar about it. A bout of jealousy began to erupt, making him ask himself if they were really dating and feeling his heart clench in sheer pain. Suddenly, Han woke himself up to the fact that Vivi was currently single and had complete freedom to meet whoever she wanted. Although his mouth always claimed he wasn't jealous at all, his legs under the table were trembling violently due to unconcealable agitation. Han Lu told himself to order food very quickly and then leave immediately. He decisively raised his hand to signal for a waiter. Suddenly, a completely surprised voice rang out right next to him. making the nerdy guy unable to help but startle. Han-Lu slightly adjusted his glasses and looked up with a highly guarded expression at the unexpected appearance. He was utterly dumbfounded upon realizing the waiter was Kane Duong, who was equally shocked to catch his friend here. Kane excitedly explained he was working part-time and wondered why Han was sitting all alone in a corner while tagging along with Vivi. He pointed at the little girl's table while pressing for a reason, forcing Han to awkwardly explain that it was all just a coincidence. Seeing his friend's embarrassment, Kane enthusiastically offered to give a special discount, making Han doubt his authority. Contrary to speculation, Kane loudly declared he was actually the young master of this restaurant, leaving Han-Lu speechless with shock. The big boss was so enthusiastic, he took it upon himself to decide the menu, despite Han having to speak up to demand his right to choose his own food. Meanwhile, Vivi at the next table suddenly had a strange premonition and looked back searching, thinking she had just heard Kane's booming voice nearby. The scene at Arkut's restaurant appeared extremely cozy, with lavish Christmas dining tables. A bowl of fresh and delicious salad was quickly placed on the table along with a highly professional wish for a good meal. Vivi couldn't help but startle when she realized the waiter in front of her was Kane Duong, the big boss guy with a rugged appearance. She excitedly asked for the reason he was here and was extremely surprised to learn this was the senior's part-time job. Kane flashed a friendly smile telling her to just call him if needed, then curiously asked whether the person accompanying her was a friend or not. Vivi introduced Enzo as a junior, making the red-haired boy tremble as he greeted, because he was overwhelmed by the murderous aura from Kane. Kane suddenly had an interesting idea and suggested Vivi invite an acquaintance sitting nearby over to share the table for fun. The young master of the restaurant pointed straight at the dark corner where Han-Lu was hiding, causing the nerdy guy to frantically wave his hands, signaling him to stop. Before being discovered, Han decisively ducked down to hide, making Kane bewilderedly scratch his head to cover his embarrassment, saying he must have seen wrong. The restaurant returned to its inherent bustle, while Han-Lu had a close call as his tailing whereabouts were almost exposed. Vivi smiled, saying goodbye to the restaurant staff, and promised that she would definitely come back next time with Enzo. Meanwhile, Han-Lu hurriedly rushed past the cashier counter like a gust of wind, leaving the female employee bewildered before she could even finish her greeting. Walking under the streetlights on Christmas Eve, he blamed himself for being so foolish to have secretly stalked them from the very beginning. Yet his legs refused to listen. He still stood from afar to quietly observe Vivi's silhouette standing next to that guy. The scene shifted to a private conversation. Kane Duong unexpectedly looked deep into Han's mind and bluntly asked if he really liked Vivi or not. Han-Lu startled and stammered a denial, trying to hide the embarrassment clearly showing on his face behind his prescription glasses. Kane demanded he stop acting because he was too familiar with Han always stealthily watching the girl throughout the entire class instead of focusing on the lecture. The big boss threw a forceful pat on the shoulder, scolding him for being an idiot and urging him to stand up and fight to win the girl he loved. Han thoughtfully bowed his head with a deeply troubled face, softly admitting that it wasn't that he didn't want to make a move, but rather because of an unspeakable reason. Kane drove another knife into his friend's heart when he remarked that in reality, Vivi seemed much closer to Enzo compared to the relationship between her and him. Han-Lu froze when he saw Enzo casually grab Vivi's hand. That intimacy made his chest tighten with extreme discomfort. His eyes behind the glasses widened in shock. He was stunned by the intense feeling of jealousy surging in his mind for the first time. He collapsed and sat flat on the ground with a lifeless face, forcing Kane to speak up and scold him, reminding him not to sit still like a statue anymore. The big boss decisively grabbed his jacket and dragged his nerdy friend away, urging him to hurry up because the target was gradually leaving. Suddenly, a fire erupted fiercely at the barbecue grill, making everyone around panic and scream, demanding to call the firefighters immediately. Overcoming the chaos, the brilliantly lit carousel appeared sparkling amidst the night, opening up a deeply romantic experience for the couple. Enzo sat on a horse's back, excitedly raised his camera, and reminded Vivi to look towards him so he could capture her most radiant smile. Vivi smiled gently in the yellow light, making the flirtatious guy exclaim praises that she was truly so incredibly beautiful and perfect. Sitting right behind, Han-Lu radiated a blazing murderous aura and silently cursed that bastard when hearing the cheesy flirting right before his eyes. Echoing laughter mixed with the dizzying spinning speed of the ride, creating an exhilarating moment, yet also full of hidden tension. The piercing screams mingled with the wind-tearing speed of the thrill ride, causing an uproar in a whole corner of the amusement park. Hanlu was stunned to hear Kane assert that this was the exact moment couples usually gave each other sweet confessions. In the distance, Vivi and Enzo were gradually approaching the dazzling Ferris wheel, making Han unable to sit still for another second. Enzo gallantly suggested Vivi join him on the wheel to behold the panoramic city view, and the girl happily nodded in agreement. Kane frantically stopped Han from tailing them, simultaneously warning about the romantic hazards that often occur in towering cabins. The big boss passionately analyzed movie scenarios, where the male and female leads always confirmed their feelings on the Wheel of Destiny. In Han's mind, the image of Enzo affectionately holding Vivi's hand under the sparkling lights and the chilly Christmas atmosphere appeared. Surging fear made Han's face turn lifeless. He silently asked himself what shady things that flirtatious guy would do when it was just the two of them. Han frantically demanded Kane stop the ride using his family's power, but he could only refuse out of fear of being skewered like a barbecue meat cart by his dad. Finally, Kane loudly declared he had a secret plan and promised to surely bring Vivi back next to his nerdy friend. Vivi was stunned to bump into Kane right at the amusement park, while Enzo wearily asked himself why this hulking guy appeared in every nook and cranny. Kane frantically grabbed Vivi's hand and called her to come along due to an emergency, despite Enzo regretfully declaring he would return to buy tickets later. The big boss acted so deeply that he was drenched in sweat, asserting there was a heavily injured cat that needed to be taken to the vet immediately. Vivi anxiously demanded Kane lead the way at once, while Enzo started feeling suspicious about why he had to personally seek out Vivi to report news about a cat. Kane bluntly stopped Enzo from tagging along and stated he was unnecessary to be present, making the red-haired boy furious because he was in the middle of hanging out with his senior. The big boss radiated a blazing murderous aura that made Enzo tremble, while simultaneously issuing a warning that keeping a girl out too late was entirely wrong. Vivi also spoke up urging Enzo to head back first, so she could go see the cat alone, simultaneously promising to text back with him after arriving home. Once he had dragged Vivi away, Kane feigned confusion wondering where the cat disappeared to, though secretly, he was worried about Hanlu's whereabouts. Vivi skeptically looked around and joked that the cat must have used its ninth life to escape on its own. She was completely unaware someone was standing watching her. Hanlu stood silently with his arms crossed and a highly possessive gaze, seeming satisfied that his date-crashing plan had succeeded brilliantly. Vivi's house silently sank into the quiet night, the yellow light casting from the window showing its owner had just returned after a long day. Vivi tiredly collapsed onto the bed in a state of exhaustion, secretly wishing she could fall asleep instantly without having to remove her makeup. She sluggishly grabbed her phone to reply to Enzo's message and realized it had been a very long time since she maintained regular conversations with someone of the opposite sex. The screen displayed the junior guy's caring inquiry about whether she had gotten home safely, prompting Vivi to quickly send a brief confirmation. However, an invisible emptiness suddenly enveloped Vivi's mind, causing her eyes to briefly flash with a dazed, deeply contemplative look regarding her own feelings. Memories of the evening rushed back when Enzo excitedly grasped her hand tightly and urged them both to head together towards the dazzling amusement park. Vivi suddenly halted in sheer astonishment at that overly intimate action, the uncomfortable feeling making her momentarily unsure of how to react. She decisively pulled her hand back and asserted she could perfectly well walk on her own, forcing Enzo to awkwardly let go and offer a highly forced apology. An unexpected notification chime rang out, cutting off her vague train of thought, pulling Vivi back to reality next to her lit-up phone. It was a photo of her posing on the carousel sent by Enzo, but what stunned Vivi the most was exactly the silent silhouette of Hanlu caught in the frame behind her. Vivi lay sprawled on the bed, softly smiling in satisfaction, seeing Enzo truly had a knack for capturing her beautiful moments. But that expression instantly froze, her eyes widening in suspicion as she discovered something incredibly unusual. The photo of her beaming on the carousel suddenly became terrifying when there was a silhouette of a man lurking in the background. Vivi tremblingly zoomed in on the image and was completely stunned upon seeing Hanlu's cold face, appearing vividly clear. Under the dim desk lamp amidst the empty room, she bewilderedly wondered why he would silently show up at the amusement park at that time. She sprang up and sat dazed with a tangled mind, secretly affirming that the recent chain of events was definitely no longer a random coincidence. Vivi shivered as she pieced everything together and was terrified to realize Hanlu had quietly stalked her across 3 separate occasions. Meanwhile, Hanlu appeared full of masculinity with mysterious tattoos, his hands meticulously guiding each artistic brushstroke. The little girl couldn't help but be confused as she asked herself if he was ultimately a creepy stalker or if it was because he had fallen deeply in love with her. Under the sparkling yellow lights reflecting on the water, his slender hands held the brush tightly as if preparing for a special moment. Vivi looked straight into his eyes with a surprised expression, softly asking if this was the Christmas gift he had specially prepared for her. Going back in time to an hour ago, although Vivi had planned to treat him to a meal to thank him for his help with her studies, Hanlu proactively took her to an incredibly luxurious restaurant with a panoramic view of the city. Seeing her hesitate, the nerd softly asked if the food was not to her taste, making Vivi just smile awkwardly to hide her extreme embarrassment. Looking at Hanlu's silent demeanor, she silently felt a strange aura radiating from him, as if something was making his mood become weird. Right at that moment, the waiter brought out the beef steak cooked medium rare exactly as requested, interrupting the quiet atmosphere between the two. Vivi observed her surroundings and wondered if he was the young master of a wealthy family, since an ordinary student could hardly visit such an extravagant place. Watching Hanlu intensely focused on cutting the steak with an unusually mature appearance, she thought to herself that he looked much older than usual, perhaps due to the immense pressure of studying. Hanlu softly asked if there was something on his face when he saw Vivi staring, causing her to clumsily wave her hands in denial. He quietly handed her the plate of steak that had been exquisitely cut into small pieces, showing a level of care that exceeded expectations. This unexpected thoughtfulness astounded Vivi so much that she had to ask since when he had become so understanding of women's psychology. Despite his nonchalant expression, she stubbornly forced him to honestly confess the secrets he was hiding. Vivi started counting on her fingers and firmly asserted that with such gallant skills, he must have had at least 5 ex-girlfriends. When she found out he had never dated, she screamed in utter amazement, causing all the diners in the restaurant to turn and look in sheer curiosity. Although remarking that he had a nerdy appearance and a somewhat bland way of talking, Vivi still admitted his looks were quite fine, leaving Hanlu wondering about the meaning behind those words. She still couldn't help but wonder why someone lacking experience in love could behave so courteously and pay attention to such tiny details. Faced with the relentless questioning of the girl opposite him, the nerd could only sweat profusely and hesitantly try to find a way to explain the truth behind it. It turned out that all that finesse stemmed from an online course on how to become an elegant gentleman that he had been secretly practicing on his computer all this time. Hanlu memorized every online lesson about acting gallantly toward all women regardless of age, making Vivi silently marvel at his mechanical learning. Her hearty laughter echoed throughout the luxurious space, making the diners at the surrounding tables turn to look in astonishment. Vivi laughed while teasing him about being a true nerd for learning how to date online, but also silently praised that eager-to-learn spirit. She softly apologized for laughing at his naivety, while admitting she didn't expect him to be this honest. Looking at her radiant expression, Hanlu smiled happily and urged her to eat quickly, worried the dish would lose its best flavor. Vivi started enjoying the plate of steak he had meticulously pre-cut, secretly appreciating the skills of this newly emerged gallant gentleman. Just as she was engrossed in enjoying the delicious food, her long strands of hair suddenly fell down, obstructing her vision right next to the plate of food. Amidst the awkwardness, a hand unexpectedly reached out to gently tuck her hair behind her ear, creating an unexpectedly quiet moment. Hanlu thoughtfully held back the falling lock of hair so she could comfortably eat without worrying about getting it dirty, an incredibly delicate act of care. Immersed in that meticulous care, she shyly asked in a low voice whether this hair-holding trick was also something he learned online. Amidst the city's sparkling nightscape, Hanlu silently confessed that he truly didn't know how to choose cosmetics or clothes for women. So, he gifted her a paintbrush with the hope that she could create beautiful paintings, not forgetting to include a rather clumsy Christmas wish. Vivi couldn't hide the astonishment on her face, knowing that the nerd in front of her had specially prepared a gift just for her. She smiled softly and sent her sincere thanks, but right after, she hesitantly raised a question that suddenly made the atmosphere tense. Vivi curiously looked straight into his eyes and asked how he could know about her passion for painting that she had always kept hidden. The unexpected question left Han-Lu speechless, panicking inwardly as he realized he had accidentally exposed his excessive attention towards her. He awkwardly scratched his head and tried to find a way to explain his sudden understanding to avoid arousing further suspicion from her. Suddenly, he remembered the pottery workshop and quickly used the excuse of seeing her decorating ceramics there, secretly sighing in relief for finding the perfect escape. Standing by the windy riverbank, Vivi nodded in agreement that it made perfect sense because she remembered he had also visited the pottery workshop a few times. She laughed heartily at her own paranoia for once thinking he was a stalker, while telling herself that she was just overthinking. Han-Lu quietly gazed at the city's night view and softly complimented that Vivi's appearance earlier was really cool. The unexpected compliment made her quite surprised, and she breathlessly asked again if she really looked as cool as he said. He nodded slightly to confirm it sincerely, his eyes still gazing into the distance, as if recalling a special moment. In Han-Lu's memory, the image of Vivi passionately focusing on her brushstrokes appeared incredibly captivating and full of life. Witnessing his sudden gentleness, Vivi was so stunned that she froze, her eyes widening and her cheeks starting to blush with shyness. She hurriedly covered her face with her hands to hide her embarrassment and exclaimed that she didn't expect him to say words that could make someone blush like that. Han-Lu suddenly lowered his voice and asked about the reason why she chose her current major, when she clearly loved art so much. Vivi looked a bit sad and said there were many hard-to-explain reasons, simultaneously wondering to herself if this gift was a sign for her to restart her passion. To reciprocate his feelings, she bent down to search in her handbag and announced that she also had a surprise gift for him. Vivi held out the carefully wrapped Christmas gift, leaving the nerd amazed to find out he was also receiving a gift from her. Vivi smiled and said that of course he had to get a gift, then explained this was both a thank you gift for her tutor and a Christmas present for a close friend. She noticed he wasn't good at handling the cold, so she had prepared a super warm wool scarf and urged him to try it on immediately. Amidst the biting cold, Han-Lu lazily complained that it was too freezing, so he really didn't want to take his hands, tucked snugly in his pockets, out. He suddenly leaned down, looked straight into Vivi's eyes, and made a bold request as to whether she could put the scarf on him directly. The nerd squinted suggestively, using a warm, deep voice to beg sweetly, making the atmosphere suddenly become incredibly intimate. Vivi awkwardly agreed in confusion, secretly wondering what exactly he was plotting to have such unexpectedly proactive actions. Standing at such a close distance, Han-Lu quietly observed her naive expression and secretly admitted that from this angle, she looked truly adorable. Her small hands began to reach out, carefully pulling the soft wool scarf to prepare to wrap it around the neck of the boy opposite her. Vivi thoughtfully wrapped the dark blue scarf around his neck, creating a close and romantic moment in the freezing winter. After finishing, she looked up at him with a radiant smile and softly asked if the scarf was enough to warm him up at this moment. Han-Lu smiled in satisfaction and affirmed that the scarf Vivi had just put on him truly brought an incredibly warm feeling. Admiring the sparkling panoramic view of the city, she shared that she had come here to sketch many times, but this was the first time she had seen this beauty at night. Vivi wondered if he had ever set foot in this secluded park before, because it seemed very few people knew of the existence of such a wonderful place. She softly clasped her hands, dreaming of a romantic Christmas night being next to the one she loved and enjoying the exquisite scenery together. Seeing his somewhat indifferent expression, Vivi said that a person who had never known the taste of love like him would never understand the charm of how the colder it gets, the more romantic it is. Looking at Han-Lu's bewildered appearance, looking no different from a little lamb, she felt completely helpless and no longer had the patience to explain further. Vivi gently rubbed her hands together to seek some warmth, then suggested they should quickly head back before their bodies froze from the cold. The nerd suddenly turned to look at her suggestively. He admitted he had no experience, but her words made him feel extremely curious. He unexpectedly made an interesting proposal to swap positions, asking her to become his guide and mentor in the coming time. Han-Lu firmly asserted that he wanted her to be his tutor to teach him dating experiences and wanted to start right from today. Han-Lu suddenly thrust his hands into his pockets, softly whispering that when standing before a beautiful scene in this freezing air with the one you love. He turned to look at Vivi and affirmed this was exactly what people usually did, while earnestly requesting his tutor to instruct him. The abrupt request panicked Vivi so much that she froze, screaming internally about what kind of weird teaching method this was, and what on earth was going on. She confusedly explained that these experiences had to happen in real life and she couldn't teach them, but Hanlu calmly replied that this was indeed reality. Vivi fiercely denied it and advised him to find a real girlfriend because they were just friends, asserting that the current situation was not realistic at all. Hearing that, Hanlu suddenly flashed a suggestive smile and said vaguely that if things were already like this, then his ambiguous attitude made Vivi tremble with anxiety. She secretly prayed that he wasn't about to say he wanted to date or confess his feelings to her right at this moment. The nerd continued dragging out his sentence with an incredibly mysterious expression, making her heart feel like jumping out of her chest. The atmosphere suddenly fell into silence as he abruptly went quiet and looked away as if suppressing some intense emotion. Han Lu shyly buried his face in the wool scarf, telling himself internally that just being able to be friends and stand beside her watching her smile like this was already too great a miracle for him. Nexus University bustled with welcoming new students, marking a promising new chapter amidst the lively atmosphere of the back-to-school day. Everywhere was filled with the laughter and chatter of young people realizing they were lucky to walk through the university gates together with their close friends. Han Lu appeared with his familiar nerdy look. He quietly walked through the crowd to prepare for completing the enrollment procedures for the international business major. His eyes behind the glasses suddenly wavered when he realized the silhouette he had been longing for all this time was manifesting right before his eyes. He stood perfectly still, looking after Vivi, and silently wondered in awe if she could recognize him after all this time. While Vivi politely thanked the upperclassmen for their warm welcome, she was completely unaware of a gaze quietly watching her. The two brushed past each other like strangers, leaving Han Lu with a lingering doubt as to whether their destiny would truly be continued. Looking at her figure slowly fading away, he told himself if he had finally truly touched the opportunity he had always yearned for. Everything happened just like a miracle, as they not only attended the same school and faculty, but were also coincidentally placed in the exact same class. Watching Vivi happily chatting with her friends, Han Lu began to wonder if the heavens were intentionally creating a fateful encounter exclusively for the two of them. Their reunion initially had nothing special, as both remained like two parallel lines lost amidst the noisy classroom. Han Lu still maintained his silent, nerdy demeanor. He ate while being engrossed in studying documents with an incredibly strict posture. Despite taking quite a few classes together, Vivi had never really paid attention or had any interaction with him throughout their freshman year of college. They brushed past each other in the cafeteria like strangers, without a single greeting, and it seemed she couldn't even remember his face. Things just went on like that until a coincidental day in their sophomore year, an unexpected event occurred that completely turned their destiny around. Vivi suddenly appeared with a radiant smile and proactively invited him to form a group together to complete an in-class assignment. Han Lu was stunned by the sudden invitation. He looked at her doubtfully and wondered if she truly didn't remember who he was. The distance gradually narrowed as they started sitting opposite each other in a coffee shop, no longer just one-sided glances from behind. The group study sessions just passed by, with the two quietly sitting next to each other to enjoy peaceful moments amidst the piles of schoolwork. The relationship between them became increasingly closer through clumsy gestures of care, marking a major turning point in both of their feelings. Memories of the romantic evening rushed back as Vivi rested her head on Han Lu's back on that fateful ride, silently feeling the distance between them gradually narrowing. The nerd buried his face behind the woolen scarf and suddenly fell silent, making Vivi wonder, while he told himself he should just learn to be content with his current position. He quietly pulled his hands out of his pockets when he saw her care about his coldness, making Vivi realize that all his subtle actions just now were because he was worried about her. Han Lu suddenly looked at her with a totally serious expression and asked Vivi to introduce him to a suitable match to start dating. This request left Vivi stunned. She teased him about suddenly wanting to date, while secretly breathing a sigh of relief as she realized she had misunderstood his feelings. Upon hearing Han-lu explain that this was solely for the purpose of scientific research, she could only helplessly advise him to practice talking like a normal person. Vivi excitedly promised to find him a perfect girl since this was his first time asking for help, leaving Han-lu to just reply that she didn't need to be so enthusiastic. Standing before the sparkling river view, she started probing about his ideal type, but the boy beside her nonchalantly replied that anyone would do. Vivi snapped, demanding he have clear standards like a smart and gentle girl, instead of giving a superficial answer with no real stance. She immediately thought of a bright candidate with a radiant appearance and firmly asserted that the two of them would make an absolutely perfect couple. In the dim space of the bar, Han-lu sat quietly next to the mysterious girl and softly repeated that she really didn't need to act so enthusiastic. After they parted ways, the nerd immediately sent a text to check if Vivi had gotten home safely, while thoughtfully reminding her to bundle up to avoid catching a cold. Just as she was about to enjoy the sweetness, Vivi's phone screen suddenly lit up with a video call from her best friend, Ain Pham. Vivi, who was lying back relaxing with a face mask on, hurriedly answered the call. She excitedly asked about the trip to Finland and whether Ain had met Santa Claus yet. In stark contrast to her friend's radiance, Ain appeared amidst the snow with a sorrowful face, revealing she had secretly flown back early to give her boyfriend a Christmas surprise. Seeing her friend's haggard face and smeared makeup, Vivi couldn't help but be shocked, exclaiming that Ain looked like a total mess right now. Ain choked up as she recounted the fateful moment when she saw her boyfriend happily laughing and holding hands tightly with a freshman girl right on the street. Amidst the backdrop of a snow-covered pine forest, the wealthy young lady sobbed uncontrollably while sitting in a reindeer sleigh, causing a worried Vivi to ask what terrible thing had happened. Ain walked angrily with her pile of luggage and bodyguards following behind, constantly muttering complaints about why that man dared to ignore all her calls. Hearing the shocking news, Vivi jumped up so fast that her face mask fell off, asking in disbelief if it was true that he had cheated to go with the girl she had once bumped into. Ain made a surprise appearance in a powerful black outfit, freezing her boyfriend and his mistress in their tracks. He stammered, asking why she had returned earlier than planned. Without giving the jerk a chance to explain, Ain delivered a stinging slap that sent him tumbling, coldly declaring that their relationship was officially over. She proudly turned her back and walked away, ordering her bodyguards to book a flight back to Finland immediately, leaving the terrible man kneeling on the ground behind her. Although she always acted strong, once in the car, Ain couldn't hold back her tears of resentment upon realizing the man she once loved was nothing but trash. Vivi sat on her bed and continuously expressed frustration on her friend's behalf, secretly affirming that she had noticed red flags from that guy early on. Ain resentfully confided over the video call that the bastard actually only approached her for money, making Vivi extremely furious at his heartlessness. She internally marveled at the accuracy of her previous tarot reading, while fully comforting her friend that she deserved a much better man. Suddenly, Vivi came up with a bold idea. She immediately and enthusiastically introduced Ain to a friend she currently knew. She ceaselessly hyped up Han-lu's handsome looks and charmingly humorous personality, firmly believing that her friend would instantly fall for him. Her loud gossiping made Vivi's younger sister in the next room extremely annoyed. The little girl covered her ears and whined that adults were truly bothersome. The booming music and magical colored lights enveloped the lively bar space, where silhouettes were wildly dancing to the rhythm. Vivi appeared fully radiant in a pure white fur coat. She closed her eyes, savoring her smugness, as she introduced this matchmaking between someone needing experience and a true expert. Sitting next to each other under the stark purple lights, Miss Ain and Han-lu clearly showed reluctant expressions despite their friends' praises about them being a match made in heaven. The nerd pushed up his glasses and looked sideways with deep suspicion, silently questioning if this was the smart and gentle girl advertised. Not to be outdone, Ain also wore a highly judgmental expression as she looked at him, wondering where on earth the handsome, interesting guy Vivi had promised was. Tension escalated when Ain irritably pressed him on whether he was calling her ugly, causing Han-lu to also awkwardly snap back about his own looks before deciding to let it go. Right at that moment, Enzo suddenly appeared with a flirtatious smile. He casually put his arm around Vivi's shoulders and announced he would split the four of them into two dating couples, leaving her stunned. Vivi annoyedly demanded the playboy remove his heavy arm from her, completely unaware of Han Lu standing behind with a murderous glare. The nerd sat quietly in the dark corner with his arms crossed and a darkened face, his heart endlessly screaming in outrage over the uninvited presence of his rival. Amidst the chaotic crowd, Han Lu felt incredibly out of place and secretly blamed Vivi for forcing him to come to this party scene instead of letting him focus on his studies. While Vivi was engrossed in observing the bustling bar, her gaze stopped at a familiar silhouette sitting in a hidden corner. Han Lu was walking when he suddenly bumped into Enzo. The strong collision made both of them stop in their tracks in surprise. The playboy Enzo slightly turned his head. He flashed a superficial smile and dropped a highly mocking apology to the other guy. The nerd narrowed his eyes suspiciously upon realizing the annoying, messy-haired guy he had encountered previously was suddenly showing up here. He secretly felt irritated realizing that the friends Vivi had mentioned turned out to include this troublesome guy. Han Lu coldly spoke up, asking if there was something so funny that made the other guy put on such a smug face. Enzo raised an eyebrow in defiance. He replied with a curt question, as if completely disregarding the valedictorian's presence. The atmosphere instantly grew tense as the two stood face to face. Enzo harshly asked back if he was deliberately trying to pick a fight. Just as a fight was about to break out, Vivi suddenly appeared, excitedly asking if the two of them had started getting to know each other and become close. Vivi could only smile awkwardly seeing the two of them so close, while Han Lu was secretly annoyed about her short dress, wondering what the hell this place was. Vivi enthusiastically introduced Enzo as an underclassman in the film major and Han Lu as a friend from the same major, to break the awkward atmosphere. Han Lu sarcastically called the other guy a kid, causing Enzo to immediately fly into a rage and curse the nerd as an annoying old man. The two boys' eyes shot out murderous sparks, forcing Vivi to hurriedly intervene, so they wouldn't just stand there like statues in the middle of the bar. The booming music and the frantic dancing of the surrounding crowd seemed to do nothing to soothe the smoldering tension. Enzo excitedly suggested the four of them split into two perfect couples to enjoy the fun, but the nerd disdainfully dismissed it as utter nonsense. He flashed a mischievous smile, and then unexpectedly questioned the presence of a fifth character looming up. It was none other than the school boss, Kane Duong, with a gigantic physique. He awkwardly pointed at himself and asked who he would be paired with in the group. Han Lu quietly observed the abnormal faces around him and internally blamed Vivi for dragging him into this mess. Amidst the chaos, the wealthy Miss Ain leaned in close to Vivi's ear to whisper a question about the quality of these newly appeared candidates. Ain clearly showed her disappointment, criticizing the nerd for being too bland and not at all hot like what she had always expected. Ain Pham immediately showed a dismissive attitude upon seeing the nerd Han Lu casually reading a book in the middle of a party spot. She softly mocked that he looked exactly like a weird iceberg. Even though Vivi exhausted her words introducing Enzo Din as an exciting and energetic guy, Ain flatly brushed it off because she genuinely had no interest in underclassmen. Undeterred, the female lead continued to nominate the school boss, Kane Duong, with virtues like being cheerful and friendly, hoping his warmth would soothe her friend's wounded heart. Looking at Kane's eager face under the colored lights, the young lady of the NKM Corporation just sighed softly and internally judged that his looks entirely lacked the necessary charm. Ironically, that thought slipped out as words, causing Kane Duong to instantly break down and bawl like a baby, forcing the whole group to gather around and comfort the big guy whose pride was hurt. Noticing the situation becoming chaotic, Vivi hurriedly spoke up to remind them that the main goal of this gathering was to help Ain forget the traitor and have a great time together. She excitedly raised a liquor bottle high and urged everyone to bottoms up so tonight would become an unforgettable memory, erasing all initial barriers among the members. Vivi's excessive enthusiasm left the others in utter amazement. They whispered to each other, never expecting that an exemplary female student was actually a heavyweight drinker. The clinking of glasses mixed with the booming music to create a vibrant atmosphere, marking the beginning of the young people's wild partying. The female lead did not hesitate to drain the ice-filled glass of liquor, ignoring the intense pulse of the bar's atmosphere enveloping her mind and emotions. Vivi did not hesitate to tip the imported liquor bottle to fill a large glass of ice, beginning her highly dramatic sorrow-drowning session. She downed the strong liquor in a single gulp, ignoring the pungent alcohol beginning to invade and blur her reason. The female lead slammed the empty glass down on the table, creating a harsh bang that startled Han Lu sitting opposite her. In her drunken state, Vivi sprang up, screaming that all men in the world were exactly the same kind of trash, leaving the friend group completely speechless as they watched her vent. The nerd worriedly lowered the book in his hands. He secretly regretted not stopping her from drinking too much and feared Vivi would be in danger. Enzo took the chance to throw his arm around him, sarcastically calling Han Lu a nerdy grandpa. He forced the valedictorian to drink despite knowing the guy couldn't handle alcohol. Showing no mercy, Han Lu coldly shoved the playboy away hard, causing liquor to splash all over Kane Duong sitting next to them. Vivi landed another strong punch on the table. She gritted her teeth, firmly asserting that she absolutely couldn't let this slide easily. She struggled free from their restraint, crying and yelling about going to find that cheating couple to demand justice for her best friend. Despite her friends trying to hold her back, Vivi was determined to rush off and find the enemies, making Aang just sigh in exhaustion and secretly plan an escape from this mess. Vivi's face was flushed from the alcohol. She still adamantly demanded to go enact justice to reclaim fairness for her betrayed best friend. In the face of that naive act, a faint smile bloomed on the Noid's lips, as if he found her behavior incredibly amusing. Han Lu sighed softly, then looked down at the book in his hands, silently feeling helpless against her wildly out-of-control enthusiasm. Ain Pham unexpectedly approached and raised an eyebrow, asking if he found Vivi's current demeanor truly adorable. The wealthy lady's words left Han Lu stunned. He looked at her blankly with an utterly guarded and highly skeptical expression. Ain casually crossed her arms and stated that Vivi was already very popular, directly questioning whether he was one of the guys chasing after her. The valedictorian awkwardly pushed up his glasses. He hurriedly tried to deny it with a counter-question to cover up the surging embarrassment in his heart. But Ain just smiled suggestively and exposed the truth that he had been staring at Vivi the whole time, even unconsciously smiling to himself. Han Lu hurriedly buried his head in his book's pages to avoid Ain's sharp gaze, inwardly blaming himself for making his feelings too obvious. The rich young lady looked at his back and dropped a cold remark, asserting that although he was good-looking, he was definitely not Vivi's type. Han Lu pressed the female lead about her taste in boyfriends, but the young lady Ain Pham only vaguely replied that he had to find out for himself, even though she admitted he looked decent, but a bit weird. Looking at Vivi's appearance, everyone thought she was a good, gentle girl who always chose safe solutions in life. However, in her drunken state, Vivi struggled and scolded the table for stopping her from enacting justice, deciding to take off her jacket because she believed that deep down she was always attracted to unconventional things. Under the dim lights of the bar, she revealed herself in a sexy outfit with a fiery, full of personality figure, making all eyes turn toward her. Two strange young men couldn't help but marvel at her alluring beauty and started discussing a plan to approach and get to know her. They even made a bet on who would get the beauty's phone number first, while Vivi was still dazedly looking for a way out amidst the noisy crowd. Vivi confusedly muttered that the exit was clearly right here, completely unaware of the blonde guy secretly approaching from behind with indecent intentions. She was still busy trying to find her way, without paying any mind to the threatening presence of the other young man right next to her. A rough hand suddenly touched Vivi's shoulder along with a mocking greeting, leaving her just enough time to feel a cold chill enveloping her body. Right in the heat of the moment, a tall figure suddenly appeared and tightly gripped the thug's wrist, leaving Vivi stunned by this powerful intervention. The two thugs were astonished when they saw the prey within their reach suddenly disrupted by a stranger jumping in during this critical moment. Han Lu stood tall, shielding Vivi's fragile body, his cold, piercing gaze seemingly wanting to freeze all the dark intentions of the opponents. He thoughtfully draped the fur coat back onto the drunken girl, making Vivi recognize a familiar face and excitedly invite him to go enact justice together. Assuming that this tall nerd was Vivi's boyfriend, the two strange guys had to click their tongues and walk away in regret. The female lead still hadn't stopped being excited. She raised her fist and swore to do everything to soothe the pain of her best friend Ain. Hanlu inwardly marveled as he witnessed a completely different side of Vivi, an unexpected outburst compared to her usual calm demeanor. Ain Pham smirked slightly, seeing her friend become rebellious, silently affirming that deep within Vivi's soul, there always existed a strong resistance. The wealthy young lady started revealing to Hanlu about their close past together, asserting that she understood Vivi better than anyone else in the world. Ain explained that with her soaring artistic soul, Vivi was always attracted only to unique things capable of bringing a special feeling. She concluded with a fatal statement that Vivi's type was actually bad boys, leaving the valedictorian nerd in utter shock. Ain looked straight at Hanlu and bluntly criticized him for living too safely, completely not matching Vivi's preferences. The young lady smirked suggestively, while reminding him that she still had one last important secret to reveal. It turned out that Vivi's ex-boyfriend was a toxic bad boy but had an intense charisma, which was why she still couldn't let go of the past. Ain Pham asserted that she had no intention of telling him to turn into a terrible person only to hurt Vivi once again. She wanted him to break the female lead's distorted taste and kick the shadow of that man out of her heart forever. Hanlu coldly replied that she didn't need to worry about that, his hands starting to make decisive movements on the table. The nerd was no longer interested in the bland glass of water, but suddenly reached out toward the glass of strong liquor radiating a pungent aroma right nearby. He downed the glass of liquor into his throat and swore he would conquer Vivi's heart just the way he always dominated the school's academic rankings. Hanlu gently lifted her chin and looked deeply into Vivi's dazed, heavy-hearted eyes, silently asserting that the #1 position in her heart would exclusively belong to him from now on. In the quiet space of the staircase, the nerd pulled her into his arms, creating an incredibly ambiguous posture full of possessiveness. The alarm bell echoed throughout the hallway when the sprinkler system on the ceiling was suddenly and decisively activated. The water poured down heavily into the space filled with gray smoke, creating an extremely chaotic and soaking wet scene in the middle of the room. The dedicated paintings were quickly and heavily ruined by the cruel combination of fire and water, leaving the space devastated. The school staff panicked and rushed in because they detected smoke. Then they were stunned to realize there was still a male student standing motionless in the artificial rain. The boy standing amidst the pouring water slightly bowed his head in apology. He offered a seemingly coincidental excuse that the harsh sunlight had been refracted and caused the unintended fire. Although everyone worriedly comforted him, in the darkness suddenly appeared a terrifying thought, affirming they had seen with their own eyes that he lit the fire himself with a lighter. That male student slowly turned around, revealing a masculine, angular face and broad, solid shoulders completely different from his usual nerdy look. He smirked slightly, flashing a highly arrogant smile, and dropped a challenging remark about whether his current appearance looked cool enough. Standing and observing from under a tree, Vivi realized in shock that this guy already knew of her presence and was deliberately putting on this crazy act for her to see. She was dazed, with her heart beating rapidly, an extreme fear surging in her heart as she began to see through the truly dangerous person of Hanlu. Vivi buried her head, sobbing on the dark stairs, the strong alcohol smell completely immersing her in the smoldering pain she had felt for so long. Hanlu sat quietly behind her, looking at her trembling back, his heart tightening as he felt the loneliness and brokenness enveloping the space. He slowly took off his nerdy glasses, his eyes clearly showing melancholy when the name Lien Ho, the traitor from the past, suddenly escaped her lips. The valedictorian painfully buried his face in his palms, bitterly realizing that no matter how much effort he put in, Vivi still truly couldn't forget that guy. He looked up at her with a tormented face, silently calling her name in his head as he witnessed the shattering of the girl he always cared for. In her drunken state, Vivi suddenly reached out and held Hanlu's face, choking up as she asked if Lien had truly come back to find her. She continuously asked about his studying abroad life in France and the hardships he had gone through, completely mistaking the boy in front of her for her ex. Hanlu slightly turned his head in astonishment, shockingly realizing that alcohol was truly terrifying when it could turn him into a replacement in her eyes. The black glasses fell onto the cold ground just like his heart right now, silently listening to her sob about the homesickness of the one who had left for over a year. The female lead hugged Hanlu tightly and tearfully asked if he had ever missed her. leaving the boy to only silently endure the pain of someone who came late. Hanlu looked at Vivi resolutely, affirming that no matter how her past with that guy was, it was all far behind now. He held her tightly as a declaration of sovereignty, emphasizing that the one truly beside and protecting her right now was him and no one else. His hand gently stroked her hair, his heart surging with extreme fury at being mistaken for her traitorous ex-boyfriend. Putting all anger aside, Hanlu gently lifted Vivi's chin to force her to face him directly. Vivi looked at him with teary, shocked eyes. She stammered, asking what on earth he was planning to do right in front of her right now. In the deserted space of the stairs, the nerd pulled her close into his arms, creating an incredibly intimate and possessive posture. Their hands tightly intertwined, Vivi confessed her mind was currently extremely chaotic and wondered what he wanted her to do. Hanlu gently caressed her face and admitted he couldn't maintain his usual composure, something he had always prided himself on controlling well. In the breeze blowing falling petals, he told himself that if he needed an excuse to blame for this impulsive action, perhaps it was the alcohol. The distance between their lips gradually disappeared in rapid breaths, marking a passionate kiss about to begin. Vivi's alcohol-laden breath caused the passionate kiss to suddenly be interrupted by her uncomfortable groan. She suddenly threw up violently right on the spot, making Hanlu panic and just hold her up so she wouldn't tumble down the stairs. Standing in the darkness, the nerd clearly showed a moody expression as he watched the girl he loved completely lose control. He held his head in deep regret for almost crossing the line, while mocking himself about his alcohol tolerance becoming so poor. Time passed quietly until fluffy white clouds appeared in the bright blue sky, signaling the arrival of a fresh morning. The chirping of birds woke the quiet neighborhood, and sunlight crept into the small house, where Vivi was deep in an exhausted sleep. The female lead woke up with dull, startled eyes, as if she couldn't immediately adapt to the noise of the new day. She lay on the bed with messy hair and a haggard face, endlessly complaining about the whole body aches as a result of drinking too much. In her haziness, Vivi pressed about who brought her home last night, but only received a teasing look from her younger sister holding her laptop. The younger sister recounted how Ain had struggled to get her into the room to hide it from their parents, then casually hugged the laptop to go study despite today being a day off. Vivi sighed softly as soon as she woke up. She worriedly wondered if she had accidentally done something stupid in her drunken stupor last night. The image of Hanlu's highly masculine, angular face suddenly flashed in her mind, making her feel a jolt of electricity run through her body. The female lead opened her eyes wide in shock as the fragmented memories of the passionate kiss began to flood back and take over her reasoning. She buried her face in the bed and scolded herself for being crazy, adamantly denying the weird illusions constantly dancing in her head. Just then, her younger sister suddenly popped her head through the door, asking if Vivi would celebrate New Year's Eve with the family tonight or go out with that friend again. Vivi firmly asserted she would stay home but then stopped in suspicion, silently wondering why her sister didn't just call Ain by name like usual. She hurriedly covered it up, saying it was no big deal, and used studying as an excuse to avoid her family members' curious gaze. Night fell, enveloping everything with a hovering crescent moon, signaling the final moments of the old year were gradually passing. The festive atmosphere exploded at the grand music stage, where vibrant melodies officially closed the year-end program. The two radiant hosts announced that in just a few short minutes, the old year would pass to make way for a promising new beginning. Vivi blended into the bustling crowd welcoming the new year, silently feeling the sacred meaning of family affection and the bond between loved ones. Inspiring greetings echoed from the big screen, praising the power of connection that had helped people overcome all adversities in the past year. In fact, Hanlu had proactively texted asking if Vivi was free, but she had to decline because she was busy spending time with her family during this important moment. Standing in the night, Hanlu quietly clutched the green woolen scarf Vivi gave him, an action as if wanting to hold onto the only bit of warmth in the cold winter night. Standing lonely by the windy railing, the nerd quietly gazed at the radiant city, hiding a lingering sadness behind his silent demeanor. All eyes were fixed on the main stage when the resounding countdown began, breaking the quiet atmosphere of New Year's Eve. At the third second, Vivi excitedly held up her camera to record the most radiant moment, her heart filled with hope for a bright new beginning. In contrast to that excitement, Han Lu slightly bowed his head in sorrow at the second, seemingly still immersed in his own thoughts. The clock ticked the final second as the number 1 burned brightly on the screen, officially closing a year full of upheavals and emotions. The echoing fireworks dispelled the darkness, opening a new year with the best wishes for everyone. Vivi looked up at the brilliant sky with a radiantly happy face. She gripped her camera tightly, recording the moments of exploding fireworks and silently praying for the best things to come in the new year. Meanwhile, Han Lu stood silently on the towering balcony, revealing his muscular, mysterious tattoos under the magnificent smoke of the fireworks. He gently tightened the green wool scarf blowing in the wind and silently enjoyed his solitude in the heart of the bustling city.